So because if I do this, popping
Oh, hey, there
back,
you
you
are.
and I are both on, and we go back. Cool. Neato. In fact, actually, do you want to just pop over to YouTube and I'll pop over to Twitch? We can do a quick sound check. So I'm going to do Twitch.
It's live now. Oh, I gotta unmute.
Hello, hello.
Hold on, I gotta unmute. There we go. Yeah, I've got you on YouTube.
Okay. I need to go ahead and talk.
Yes, testing, testing. Do I have volume?
Yes, you do. All right, cool. We're going to go back there. Outstanding. Let me just push a message over here. Fuck. Still have Twitch up, so I'm hearing myself and I hate it.
I mean, I got
You don't.
for this.
You don't want that. Okay, do it. I'll kill my camera for a second while I'm getting up and down, so you guys want to see my
Oh,
beautiful
we
chin.
can wait. We have soft start, right? Some people can join.
Problem there is we were on mute. Good sound check. So, all right. So let me start again. Uh, my name's Andrew or AJ. I'm the lead developer and writer for FromLight. I'm joined with Kayam Khan, award-winning director, filmmaker, also creative advisor for us on FromLight. He helps keep our storylines not sucking. And then we've got Chris Baker, our 30-year tabletop gaming veteran and GM, as well as the little spritz of chaos into all of the storylines that we're going through. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully we're going to be able to do this Devcast um, as often, a 2 week rotation, but talking about some of these kind of more soft skill things that don't get addressed in game dev at all, or in general media. So before we get into it, glad you made it here with us, and grab a adult beverage and get prepared to have a nice discussion. We've got the chat open. I'm monitoring it, so if we have some questions, we can take them as they come, or kind of hit them all at the end. So, anything you guys want to talk through before we get started?
Like specific, other
Uh,
than the game.
other than the game. Well,
Game of the
let's get after it. So first things first, we got storylines and narratives in various forms of media. Obviously, when you have books, right? You are on the journey that the author prescribes to you, unless it's a choose your own adventure, and that is actually copyrighted. I learned recently. You
the
cannot write
term.
a the
Is that
the
right?
term and the functionality of doing it is copyrighted.
Really, by who?
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah, I was just about to
yeah.
ask the same thing. Like, do you know by whom? Like,
It's like choose your own adventure press. It's something crazy like that.
Interesting.
Um, but you have what is a fairly linear. You're on the author's, you're on their storyline, and you as the participant, the audience, do not have agency. With movies and shows, I guess and kind of you can speak to this more than I can. That's pretty much the same, except in recent years.
In terms of having like a prescribed sort of
Yeah,
narrative.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that's like it's a conversation that keeps happening now that VR and AR is becoming a thing. Everyone keeps asking, is like, is VR the future of film? And what I've gotten out of that conversation after a while is that it's not. They're two very different things. Solely for this reason that filmmaking and a director's point of view, like they have to prescribe the shot, the close up, the medium, the wide, and the timing. That's their perspective. And if you're not doing that, then it's not, I don't think it's that version of filmmaking. I think in the future we'll probably see different versions of it, but VR is almost, I think, fundamentally the opposite in a way, in that in terms of the cinematography aspect, that you don't have wides and close-ups and all that. You don't have coverage,
Hmm.
which is the standard film thing. This is the one person you look around, you see whatever you want. You kind of choose what you're looking at. So the way you build the attention around that, I think, is a very different approach because you can't just put a close up on an object and say, look at this, and then dolly in and say, this is important, pay attention to this later. Now it's a different frame you have to create for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Still possible, but totally
well,
different experience, which is the fun part.
do you remember Con in the early aughts? there was a lot of like push behind DVDs and like at home having like multiple angles you could like see stuff from. Could you see it like kind of
Really?
winding into something like that? You remember that? Like there was hardly anything done with it, but it was
Camera
like
angles on a
really
DVD?
pushed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
like
I
they would give
remember
you
that.
like you could
That
literally click through like different angles of a shot,
get
and there was
out.
like yeah, it was push as this really big thing. Like look it up sometime if you get a chance. I don't remember what they called it. I think in fact, I might be wrong on this. Don't take my word of scripture on this, but I think that each company maybe even had a different term for it.
Got it. Like
Like
a branded
Universal may
product.
have called it something different. And somebody like, probably like in the scramble to have like, we all know like Dolby Digital versus TH or versus DTS versus whatever. It's
Mm,
like I think they were all kind of pushing for like their platform on it. And it didn't
interesting.
work for anyone. But I could see it like maybe
Yeah.
something like that where like, VR experience when you're like doing a scene. Anyway, I
Well,
won't derail us too hard, but
sorry, so go on.
It actually does bring up an interesting thing that Con you and I had talked about um, fairly long ago, where we were discussing doing some virtual production stuff, right? And how to make the emotion and the nuance of everything with that virtual production, where you might see it up on a stage, but
Mm,
your view when you're front and center is probably a little bit more epic than when you're in the very corner and all you're seeing is, the hind end of the actor the entire time, right?
mm,
Or of the digital avatar. But, um, which makes a good segue into different perspectives and, absolutely kind of chaotic storytelling is your tabletop pen and paper games.
oh
Um,
boy.
and how often, Baker, have you been like have you spent hours, and this is a meme, this is a recurring meme, you spend hours and hours on this great storyline only to have your players chase a rabbit through the woods?
Oh yeah, no, it's herding cats in the most true sense of the term. Like when it comes to that type of storytelling, you have to like almost build these like permeable stories, or you have to like figure out how to kind of like lead them sometimes maybe by the nose back to what you want them to do. But yeah, oh my god, absolutely. You can spend so much time just having like this great thing set up, and next thing you know they're like, yeah, but I want to live in the trees and speak with the chipmunks. By the way, that's not hyperbole, that actually happened. I had a player who suffered a mental break he thought his character would have, and so he chose to live in the trees and speak with squirrels for the next, I think it was 2 sessions. So then as a writer, I had to figure out like, well, what the hell are these squirrels going to tell this guy that's at least entertaining, right? It's like
Right.
it's almost like being an improv comedian at a certain point where it's like you're just having to like on the fly come up with stuff to fit what your players want to do, and it's hellish. It's not for everybody. Like
Yeah.
That's what blows
people,
me. That's what blows me away about DMs is just the improv, like the constant story. Because my approach to it is the opposite. Like I'm the slowest writer ever. It takes me forever just to start, and then to finish is even longer. And just to sit there and be able to keep it going. But in a way, I think I can see how it could work because when I do start writer sessions with my friends, my rooms and stuff, we do the feeling is that we're all unlocking this idea together. We all share this idea and it's all kind of stored away. And then when we come together, we all sort of put out on the table in front of us. And I can see how literally doing that as a game would get you back into the idea and be able to keep some of it alive because you're living in it, which is interesting.
yeah, well,
'Cause-
it's hard to do
w-
too. I mean, like I know off stream, during in fact, our first meeting, Con, you and I, uh, we started kind of doing some of that. Like it's interesting, like how, and I think you're absolutely right. I think you're right. It's like getting together and like you're not really so much building it as you're like tearing through the different layers of it. It's like
discovering
you're like
it.
it's
Yep.
like solving a puzzle practically.
Mm,
It's like maybe it's the puzzle box from Hellraiser. I can't tell you how it's going to end up, but
yeah.
it's still one of those things where it's like, even what were we talking about? Like, we got crazy. It was like you got like a guy with a painting, like Dorian Gray style. You had to go get
Oh
him, and
yeah,
like,
that's
Yeah.
right.
you remember
Yeah.
the whole bartender
That's
joke? And it's like,
right.
if chat or people watching this in the future ever really want to hear this story, we will go back. I have it
That was a
in
good
my
one.
notes because it was such a good idea that I was like, oh, I'm going to use this in a game at some point. So
Right.
Nice. So one
And
thing I wanted to sorry, just to segue back
yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of the bridging story and developer aspect, something you said earlier about like you can't write a discrete conclusive story. You have to create opportunities for other things, like a permeable story is the way you put it, I think.
Yeah.
That made me think of not writing results when you do code, not writing a result, but writing a function that can take different inputs and
Mhm.
get different outputs. And it's like a procedural thing almost. It
Yeah,
just had
it
that
comes
power.
back to, and I know AJ, I was talking to you about this for a little while, like the
Yeah,
whole, I'm reading that book,
the
thinking
systems.
thinking in systems, yeah,
Yeah.
and like that's been a big help for for my whatever you want to call it. Some people would call it your craft, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm just doing like the really advanced version of make believe on the playground, like I've taken
Craft.
that to an unusual extreme.
That's craft.
It is. It is. And then, I guess I find this really interesting middle ground on the video game side where, yes, we want to present these really rich, deep, episodic, almost television-esque scenarios to players because, of course, what player does not want to feel like they're the star of their own TV show, right? But our game is in VR. FromLight is a VR first game. So, unfortunately, with that, you have players who are literally able to do all these crazy interactions like, hey, I want to climb the wall. That, there's enemies in front of me, they're coming after me. I'm going to climb the wall. Well, now you have to account for that, right? So you don't have as much because it's all systemic, right? It's all code based. You don't have as much lead up and prep as maybe shooting a movie or a film, but you also do not have the freedom that you would have doing a pen and paper game, right? Where, the only limiting factor is how quickly you as a game master can adjust to, that changing thing, or throwing the dice roll that says, yeah, you tried climbing the wall, but you don't get to.
Right.
Um, which does bring us into our video game narratives, which breaking these down really quick, and I'll go fast over this part. These are fairly well defined, right? You've got your simple narratives, your Mario Brothers, Angry Birds, nothing that you want to dig too deep into. The narrative is kind of the just a little bit of lubrication behind the actual gameplay. Nobody takes it seriously. Then you have your plot on rails, right? And this is seen in your first-person shooters, Call of Duty, Battlefield. There's something bad that's going to happen, and you have to go sneak in and be, a badass soldier that, I don't know, can also fly helicopters and do all sorts of military MOSs that don't actually exist.
Wait, hang on. You're telling me that the C-130 cannoneer scenes in every single Call of Duty that's not a full-on job?
Cannoneer, yes, yes, that actually is. I will
Oh, I
give,
messed up and used the right word. Sorry. I
but
meant
You're accurate.
but
mounted gun segment. That was
but the
obligatory.
cannoneer parachuting out, then doing the special forces sniper team stuff, yeah, that doesn't really work. Um,
Are you telling
then
us
you
real life is boring in some way and not at all like video games? Because I'm not willing to accept that right now.
it did
Yeah.
remind me of some cat that our mutual friend Patrick would remember, who liked to quantify things in video games by the military service he said he was a part of. And so he had somehow, in his relatively short term of life, had served in every service of the U.S. military. It is very impressive. He knew a lot. I was always impressed with that guy. Um, but back to the video game narratives. Um, yeah, so then we have our RPG on rails, right? And this is your Dark Souls games. Um, and to some extent, and I know we might get a little bit of hate for this, but your Elden Ring. Because at the end of the day, yeah, you're making a few choices in that type of a game, but most of the choices are around your actual character, right? You don't change the world.
As in like scripted characters.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and to contrast that, we'll talk about a game like your freeform storylines like Mass Effect, right? And that was a game I loved. That game is near and dear to my heart. Um, yeah, you had your character progression, but ignoring the opinions about the third Mass Effect, because I know that has somewhat controversial even nowadays. But your character could dramatically change what happened, and that was a what I thought was a really cool hallmark of most Bioware games of that time.
Right, and I think that's an important distinction because, Elden Ring, don't get me wrong, like one of the best games of all time, that's not a hill I'm willing to die on if somebody tells me it's the best game of all time, like I'm just going to grant them that. But what you're doing is you're interacting with the world the way that you want to. There's a lot of environmental storytelling in Elden Ring that's
Mhm.
very interesting. But at the end of the day, and actually that's I guess a little succinct, but at the end of the day, what you're really doing is you're choosing your ending. There is more game to uncover by making different choices for sure. And there's some slightly different ways in which you interact with characters. But at the end of the day, what you're really getting is you're picking your ending. You're picking
Yeah.
how you end that story. Whereas you're absolutely right. There's a lot of games out there. Of course, you stole the best examples, so now I'm totally screwed. But Mass Effect, yeah, you are like crafting your own story in a lot of ways. Like it
Yep.
What was
really changes things. At least till the
what,
third one, but we don't talk about that.
what was Zelda? Like the Ocarina of Time, that was like kind of open world, but it was on rails. It felt.
Yeah,
That was very on rails. I don't
I
think you
would
even
call
got
that an
multiple
RPG on
endings.
rails.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
you don't even get multiple endings for that unless it's.
Yep.
Oh no, I guess that's incorrect. You do Ocarina of Time when you get to the whole Zelda segment of that. I guess you're either escaping Ganondorf's dungeon or you're not. There's like
Hmm.
I think there's two different avenues, but still at the end of the day, yeah, your choices are giving you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Castlevania Symphony of the Night is one of my favorite examples, where if you 100% that game, you get a different ending
Mm.
versus if you 200% that game. Uh, which I feel like I realize that's weird to hear, but yeah, there's a
Do you remember
whole
Star
second half to
Fox?
that game.
Star
Oh,
Fox had that
absolutely.
whole had like mission complete versus mission accomplished, and I never
Hmm.
did finish all of them with whichever the better one was because I think that gives you. I think it's supposed to unlock foot mode and multiplayer, and I never did that,
Are
which
we
is the
talking
thing.
Star Fox 64?
Yes,
The
64.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, there were actually four different paths you could take that would
4.
lead to a completely different ending, and then yeah, it would give you your little squat, furries running around shooting each other on foot. It would give you that
Hmm.
mode, or that it would give you that
Ah,
vehicle in the vehicle selection from the multiplayer. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
wow. I never unlocked it.
Yeah.
But I mean,
And then
again, what you're doing is you're selecting an ending, though, right? Like that's
yeah.
still at the end of the day, you're not shaping the narrative. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
That's almost what you'd call as a plot on rails.
mm,
If your player is stuck doing you know one of four endings, you're not actually giving them a whole lot of agency, right, within that. Now compare that to a true open world game like your Elder Scrolls, your BioWare, or not BioWare, your Fallout series. Um, those games, you start up, you do. I remember the quest in Skyrim where the dragon comes, hits the village, right? You run through the little keep, end up going out the cave, and then you're just there. You're
yeah,
in the
you're plopped in.
wilderness. You get a quest icon that says, "Hey, go to Riverwood," but it might as well be, "Hey, it'd be a good idea to go to Riverwood, but it looks really cool over here,"
mm,
Yeah,
right?
they just give you that little pat on the butt and a good luck. It's like,
Yeah,
mm.
and for a lot of players, there was quite a few, and again, you get into meme territory here, but a lot of players that go just start exploring stuff. They just see where the terrain takes them. And by the time they get to Riverwood and they do that little bit of bagpipes and BS and go fight that first dragon, it's like one hit and the dragon's dead,
Mm.
yes, I
right?
had a very similar experience with Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Actually, with Cyberpunk 2077, I didn't even get my first mod, and I played that. Not even my first mod. My mission was go to the guide to get your first mod. I played 6.5 hours of Cyberpunk 2077 before I went to go get my first mod.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing? Is that a good thing you have the freedom to do whatever without having to be bound to the
Oh,
story?
I mean, depends on the audience, right? I mean, like for me, I was upset that I finally had to go get my first mod to make things happen. Like I didn't even want to be that shoehorned, But for a lot of people, like, you know,
It is a good thing, but for a game developer, when you have that level of openness, now suddenly you're starting to talking about like I need to develop my character interactions to account for I haven't gotten my first mod yet. I am this far early in the story. You can't make those expectations. A game that I think does a disgustingly good job, and I don't know if any of you guys have gotten into the early access of it, but Baldur's Gate 3,
mm,
like, oh my goodness, they have done such a fantastic job of every little nuance. Like, I want to see how they're tracking that stuff. It is
Hmm.
brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant.
Is it like things come back and characters seem to have a memory of past experiences that were unique and spontaneous, or
Absolutely. You might walk out of a place and characters might talk to you about, hey, yeah, I think we did this in kind of the right way or the wrong way. And then, and granted, it's still in early access, so there's maybe, according to them, like a quarter of the game. Um, but man, it is like it comes back like something like, hey, yeah, we did this way, and I think we would have been better off doing it the other way. And you're halfway through the game, and you're just like, wait, what?
so?
Like,
Remember we were talking about earlier with semantic searches and open.
yeah,
This is probably ridiculous, but would it be plausible? And I'm sure someone's going to do it at some point, or adopt their own local system. But to have an NLP basically take game characters input, and you store a database of the events that happened. You can say user went through or player
mhm.
went through mine, experienced troll, exited through western cave. And those are all known. You feed that into something that can semantically process a response, and your characters are talking English now about those events.
Yeah. So that's actually weird segue. Nice. How we're handling it for FromLight. We
Interesting.
have the ability just to write events to a character log, right? We're just slamming events at this. And then when we handle our dialogues, we give those dialogue actors the ability to parse that event log, right?
Nice.
And now we say, hey, these are relevant events to this actor. Okay, here's a different dialogue tree.
That's awesome.
it's really good.
Bec- Now, granted, it does take a little bit more work on our end because now we have to like kind of remember and chronicle what events are being shot out, right? Um, but the whole goal behind an RPG is to make the player feel like they are playing this realistic experience. They are playing this role, right? Role playing game.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Spontaneous.
yeah, they're within the story and they're a part of it. Well, you can't do it if, they killed every character in the town and somebody walks up and says, "Oh, you're the savior of this town." Well, that doesn't work. And some games do
Depends on
kind
your
of fall short of
perspective.
it. Well, right?
Depends on how annoying the town was.
Yeah.
I mean,
Um,
look, there's a murder hobo or five in every friend group.
yeah. Well, and
Let's just
that's
be honest. We all we can name them. Don't we won't name names, but we could
well,
name them right now. I'm sure.
and the term murder hobo is popular in pen and paper games, and that's unfortunately one of the realities that we have to account for as developers, right?
Explain it to me if you could, Murder Hobo. I've not actually heard it before.
The
Oh
type
boy.
of yeah, go ahead, Baker.
So oh, and I probably won't even do this justice. Like I'm sure there's going to be several people who hear this in the future who are going to be like, "Oh, this isn't the best description." And feel free to send me your hate mail. It's okay. Um, the murder hobo is basically they have no home base. They're not trying to build anything. They're not trying to construct. Some players get distracted with like, I want a town build. I want to help this village. I want to build my kingdom. I want no. The murder hobo has no interest in that. They just want to wander around and they want to take whatever they can take and they want to kill whoever they can kill and they just want to basically line their pockets. Only almost, I would say, I can't say 100%, but I would say a large degree of their motivation is gaining more power to see who else they can get away with killing. So
So
they're
interesting.
fully transient. They're fully like they just do not care about the story. They're not engaged in that. They just want to wander around and kill everyone. You know what it is?
Yep.
It's the old Grand Theft Auto rampage.
Yep.
It's when people would just load up Grand Theft Auto, and there is a story. I mean, allegedly. I've never engaged with it myself because in Grand Theft Auto, I play the role of the murder hobo. I want to see what kind of guns I can get. I want to blow up every possible thing and just go
Uh,
on rampages, right?
Here's an interesting thought, because I feel like that game brought that out in a lot of people. That was almost what that game allowed was, or here's a question: if
Mm.
given the opportunity to do whatever you want with no consequences, would we all just try the murder hobo thing for a minute? And I think what has happened over time is it burnt steam for me. I was like, there's only so long I can do the rampage thing, and GTA Online I feel like just turned into that. One day I joined and it was just the craziest thing I've ever seen. Just planes and rockets and alien space. I was like, what the fuck? And so I was like, I can't handle this. And I feel like that's what it's become. It's filtered down to the people who are just full murder hobo.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, I would say that that's the majority of it. Although, to be fair, in Grand Theft Auto Online, there are terrific communities you can join that are weirdly RP centric. I won't say weirdly. I mean, that sounds just a little
The
biased, a
racing
little
one
prejudiced.
I was in,
Yeah, yeah, there's a
that
lot of
was fun.
those where it's like you
Yeah.
pick a job and like that's what you do in that world. So, I think it'll naturally organize itself to a point. But yes, AJ's absolutely right. You do have to at least allow that, even if not everybody wants to engage with that as their only play mode. Everybody's going to do it at least once, right? Like to a
And
large degree.
much less allow, but account for. Because this is
Sure.
something, you know, it's easy to say, they do the murder hobo thing because it's online and they can get away with it. And, people know about internet trolls, just ignoring any type of story or plot development. But people do this in single player games. Like, there are players that have logged into Skyrim, did the initial mission, and then went back and just killed everybody. They
Yeah. I
literally
mean,
tried to depopulate the continent of Skyrim. Or country,
And
kingdom,
it's
whatever.
region,
permanent. Like
whatever.
when
Yeah.
they don't respawn, like you can actually depopulate it down.
In Skyrim, I believe it was, yeah.
Yeah, I think Oblivion was one where at least guards would continue to spawn, but
Yeah.
I think. See, I never murder hoboed Skyrim, so I can't tell you. But
No, the default NPCs would respawn. So like guards, bandits, over time, some of the places of interest in the in whatever you went to would repopulate. Um, but now, you talk about from a developer perspective, what happens when you have a critical story character and the players just decide to kill him. Well, Skyrim did the cheap thing of like they would like collapse to the ground and then they'd get back up. You could never actually kill them,
Mhm.
right? For our purposes, we have a social zone, right? The idea of this zone is to log into, you know, relax, find your next mission, do your shopping to prepare for your next mission, meet up with your buddies and go. So for a lot of places in this social zone for us, we don't even want to give you the ability to draw a weapon because otherwise, again, VR, you have all sorts of different players, a lot of them are on the younger end, who are going to walk up and wave a sword in somebody's face. Okay? That immersion and that breaking of immersion by behavior um, kind of destroys the lore and the setting for those players. I
But
mean,
you
imagine. Sorry. Imagine like Aragorn walking out of the two towers in Lord of the Ring. He's getting ready to go to Mordor to show Sauron for the last time, and some 12-year-old dude wanders up and shoves a sword in his face. Like,
mm,
you know what I mean?
kills it.
Like your whole epic feeling of this just goes right down the
yeah,
tubes.
it goes from cinematic experience to collegehumor.com real quick.
Yeah. God, you
Do
just
you keep it?
dated
Do you
yourself
keep it?
right there.
I am old.
college humor. That's still around, right?
Is that
Still a
still a
thing.
thing? It might be. I don't know.
Still a thing. I think it's a thing. So for the waving a sword in someone's face thing, what does that mean? That when you're entering these pivotal cinematic, like pivotal narrative moments, you isolate people, like it's your own moment, you have that. And like if that's the case, if you want to clean the moment up and make sure like you maintain the integrity of the cinematicness of it, does it mean you have to remove all the other players to do that?
Well, there's a couple of ways you can do that from a development perspective. Yeah, instancing that moment is just as easy as taking every player around there that's not in the players group and going, not visible. Boom, they're gone, right? Um, Alternately, when you're talking about just regular world events, having areas where the player is not allowed to do certain actions that would be sensible, like making an area where the player is not allowed to draw their weapons.
Mm.
You know, if you're in a medieval inn in a fortified village, which, for the people on the stream, you can see the background, that's our village. Um, if you draw a weapon, people are going to take umbrage, right? Our world is very dangerous. They don't want, a bunch of bullshit happening. Excuse my French. Um, but it's one of those things where it doesn't pay to have whatchamacallit. It doesn't pay to like allow actions that would be disruptive to the play style of what is going on, right?
Mm. And is that restriction like mostly in the social zone where you start, or does that get restricted elsewhere in the world when you're along your journey?
I would say in the social zone, because when you're in your journey, when you're out on an instanced area, you're with the people you're with, right? And so if you're gaming with a guy who's kind of a little spastic, maybe they like waving their
Mm.
swords all over the place, that's who you're gaming with. Maybe you dig that too. Guilty by association, right?
Yeah, it becomes
Mm.
your call.
Yeah.
You enter the
Um,
dungeon with your squad.
exactly. But that does bring us into, the next narrative style, which is, your contained narrative. Having this instanced world state where you don't actually, like outside of it, there isn't a whole lot that goes on, right? Your instance dungeons, this is common. I know Dungeons and Dragons Online is a classic example of it, which they do actually a fairly good job of presenting players with a really, oftentimes really cool dungeons, modules, you name it. But at the end of the day, you do your dungeon, then you go back to, I think it's Stormreach in that game. And Stormreach is the same. Everything you've done, is pretty much just Stormreach. And, you know, that ties into kind of the next one, which a lot of MMOs walk into, which is irrelevant storylines. What the player does doesn't change the world. EverQuest 1 and 2, Arcade, Black Desert Online, all these large MMOs in which you go there, you go kill your 10 rats, you turn in your quest, you get your experience, you move on. The player doesn't matter to the world, realistically. There's nothing that an individual player can do that will change world states. Which, a lot of MMOs are predicated on the idea that you can be this fantastic hero and it's epic and everything else. But, for me, that kind of breaks it, right? You know,
Yeah.
you might see something super cool of, oh man, I did this, it's awesome. And then you see somebody run past with like flaming armor and it's, you're just like, oh, apparently there's a cooler hero than me. Fuck me, right?
Right.
The
Right. Well,
samurai on fire.
narratively,
Yeah.
narratively, they leaned into that too, in a way that it's funny. I'm a longtime World of Warcraft player, and they kind of like at a certain point, the story writing all became like everybody in the world calls me like legendary hero, master chief, general guy, and I'm like, that's kind of not my character fantasy. You know, like when you talk about that, like breaking your immersion, it's not even just so much a matter of like the other guy running by in the with the flaming broadsword of plus 35
Destiny.
awesomeness.
Mm.
Yeah, Destiny. There you go. It's more just a matter of like narratively how I'm treated too. Like having some control over that is super important.
Yeah,
Interesting.
because if you're playing like a secretive rogue assassin and you're like the best at your craft, you don't want to be world renowned.
Yeah, if people know that you exist,
Mm.
you're a terrible ninja.
Yeah, exactly. So
So
go ahead, go ahead.
sorry. Question on that. Like, is there a dynamic that could be interesting to play with if done properly, which is a sort of consequential earning of your title, where it's almost like Inglorious Bastards, Hans Landa, who has this whole moniker, right? Like he's the Jew hunter, whatever it is, and he doesn't like it, but he's earned it in a way. He's like, it's this whole bittersweet thing of like, yes, I've got a
Hmm.
title for my skills, but it's not the one I wanted. And I wonder if, while it might seem that like being earned that title of Master Slayer, whatever, isn't what you went for, and if it's not acknowledged, if it's not acknowledged that we're giving you this title because you've earned it, regardless of what you wanted, this is what you've done though, and you're getting it. I think if it's not acknowledged, it feels like a ricochet. I wonder if it was fully acknowledged, if it could be a fun dynamic where like you've earned Merchant of Death, you tried to be a good guy, but you did
Eh,
the actions of Merchant of Death, and here you are.
like the renown of your actions
Yeah.
versus like if you don't want to be known
Yeah,
as Ichi the killer, but well you killed a lot of people, or it's like
Yeah.
the unkilled, the undying, or something, some like real out there title, and it's like, oh, I never meant to be that. Like I just ducked when the dragon tried to get me with the fire, and now everybody calls me Ironside. It's like, okay, well, yes,
Mm.
that's interesting. That's interesting.
yeah,
Legacy almost of myth and fable.
Yeah,
and our system of so we have kind of a different alignment system than what you might find in a pen and paper or um, a lot of other games where they just give you your your lawful good, your lawful evil, etc. So we track actions from the players according to lawful or chaotic, which is the same, right? Or how selfless or selfish those actions are. So we do away with good or evil, because what is good and what is evil to one person is different from the next person. You know, bring bring back our conversation about the
yeah.
murder hobos. But
My
Do you feel
favorite.
like that? Do you feel like that plays into like how you intend to have every player, kind of they're the focus of their timeline, right? Like they're like
no,
the main character of their own thing.
I don't intend to let our players be entirely the main character of their thing. I think there's a lot of narrative.
Or I guess I mean so far as like owning their own timeline, right? Like being their
Yes,
own shard.
yes, and that comes into a development piece where if two players want to play together and they are on different timelines, different shards, what have you, then what we do is we take those players and we say, okay, you join this guy. Do you want to also adopt his shard, his
Mhm.
timeline, or do you just want to play it, right? Short term, long term, and we give the players that choice, right? Because they should. Our goal as a company is to provide that fantastic experience to the player. Okay, so if a player, and some people might say like, oh well, if they made bad choices, they should be subject to those choices. I don't give a damn. I mean, it's like why do you do pen and paper, right? Because you're having fun with it. You're enjoying it. It's a great story. Why do you watch a television show or a miniseries? Because it captures your attention. It captures your imagination.
Like catharsis
Yeah.
is it gives you resolve. Somehow you get something out of it. You get the resolve.
So for us, the player's experience is paramount, right? So if one player wants to adopt a different timeline to play with their buddy, now they can be in lockstep. I'm cool with that. And now what we have is the ability to do a differential between their events, right? There are some events that are tagged as being, kind of world events, so they have to adopt that player's world events. There are other events that are much smaller, and they can keep those, so they can keep their players in individual identity even as they adopt another shard,
So
right?
how does that work? If I'm on my timeline and I have a single player timeline, I start a multiplayer session, does my is it a decision between the two players whose timeline is adopted?
Yeah, well, so when you are invited to another player's group, they're the group leader, right? You
Mm.
get the option to adopt their timeline. And so what it'll do is the database will, look through and say, hey, these are world events that need to be changed to adopt this timeline, right? Give that
Mm.
option to the player, you overwrite those world events, and you're good. But that player's events, their individual actions, how altruistic or selfish they are as a person, remain static, right? That character, that them, is still there. So
But
that's our
Yeah,
they're
way.
I get it.
Sorry, go ahead.
so I was gonna so what is adopted then? So if I join somebody else's group, I adopt some of the larger
Hmm.
narrative points. Maybe a war happened or didn't happen, something like that. I will
Absolutely.
join their time. So does that mean when I leave that group session, I am now branching from that storyline onto my own path, or do I resume my previous storyline?
Well, yeah, you essentially branch, right? So if you adopt their timeline, it writes it in the database. So you have a
Okay.
database for all player events. You adopt it, you're taking it. Now, if you leave them, you're on your own. That's you, right?
Mm.
And you can go back and readopt, and we're gonna have players that do both, vice versa, because that's how game sessions work, and we need to support that. But it is, a narrative conundrum where you're trying to figure out how to ensure that if I have a friend in this game, I can play with them and still, enjoy what I'm doing, what I've done by myself and what I've done with them. Because the end result is making it consistent.
Could that come down to creating tiers of the narrative where there's like large scale things like this
Yeah.
god has landed on the planet, and then there's local things, and maybe maybe it's like seasons of these games that come out now where it's like everyone's kind of got this like third high level same narrative, but locally on the first level you have your own, but you kind of end up getting to that
Hmm.
top level. Does that make sense? So while you can adopt your friends, you can join his group and adopt their storyline. What doesn't change are the third level things, meaning like whatever the big world event that's happened, that's still that world event. You've just now joined the local story in this part of the world that's changed now.
Well, I would probably. So we have this broken out a couple of ways. And yes, we do have world events, and mostly for us, that's to handle seasonality of gameplay, right? It is winter. We're doing our winter event, etc. That won't change. You won't adopt into summertime, right?
Mm.
But the narrative events that are big timeline altering, I failed this mission, therefore this village got destroyed. That's the type of stuff that changes. On the flip, the low level, the really low level things, I stole this thing so this guy doesn't like me, those will not change, right? Those are irrelevant to the other guy's storyline. So you talk about this order of operations, and when you're talking about tiers, you're 100% spot on, right? That is the only logical way of differentiating these so that you can sort between them and ensure that when you adopt a timeline, it makes sense and your character maintains their identity, who they are, what they've done, but as well as the world state of the group that you're being adopted into.
Mm.
Would you say it's safe just as like a quick an example, if you had like, let's say you stole something from a guy, right, and he hates your guts.
Yep.
If your friend joins your game, he doesn't have any reason to hate you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or would he hate you by association?
No, if your friend joined your game and he didn't know, I mean, the AI doesn't necessarily know everything, right?
Sure.
And that's, something that some games are not great at handling. But on our side, um, if you go and get your buddy to talk to this person and they don't know you and you haven't pissed them off, that can be a great way of getting past a quest, right?
Yeah. I was kind of thinking of the comedic value of that too, where it's like if let's say 3 of my friends are playing this game and they're all working with this dude who's like their quest hub, but in my world, that guy hates my guts. When I join
Right.
the game, I'm like, oh, I can't talk to that cat. Like
Mm-hmm.
that guy will not deal with me. So
Now
it's
you're
like
talking a
I will go
whole
with
new
you.
level of immersion.
You know what I mean? Yeah,
That'd
it's
be
Yeah.
really
cool.
that's actually really genius.
But if like became a condition, like yes, I'll help you 3 as long as he's not involved, and now
Yeah,
it
but
becomes a
F that
bargaining
guy in
thing.
particular. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
I'm going to
you
give
want me
you
to work
guys
with him?
something to help you on your quest. You get a magical something. You get, a potion. You get torches and tools, and you piss
Get a
off.
middle finger.
And you get this. It's my finest middle finger. It's enchanted just for you,
we're
buddy.
gonna have to get that animation for our characters, right?
Oh,
Just boom.
wouldn't it be great if they could just be like, oh, by the way,
I
though, I'll
got you, bro. I
double your
got you.
quest reward if you ghost that guy while you're out there.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I'm about to say.
Just go, oh,
Leveraging,
no.
like, so what if in merging these things, you actually created these imbalances? You took the positive, negatives of everybody, the net feeling between characters, summed it up, and whoever's striking the imbalance, they have consequences, and the quest
Yep.
becomes leveraged around their inadequacies.
Oh, that would be interesting too, because like then the townspeople would be like, "Oh yeah, you guys are great," but then this other guy joins, and like, "Why are you hanging out with that guy?"
Yeah,
Yeah,
we liked
exactly,
you.
right?
We thought you were stand-up people, but this guy's a he's a
This
murder
guy,
hobo.
yeah,
And
like why are you hanging out?
and it's as easy as doing a query in the conversation to say, "Hey, you have a group. I'm going to check your group mates. This guy I don't like. All right, here's a new response." But it requires writing to deal with it.
Sure.
And that's, the writing is what actually makes this happen. Being able to recognize those events and understanding, hey, we created an event for if you trash this dude's shop in this quest. Okay, let's acknowledge that. And not overdoing it. That's another important thing, right?
Yeah, it's like how do you program in like bitterness and resentment and stuff? That's
Yeah.
the idea.
And in a way that you don't have to continually reach back and like try to keep track of everything that's going on. Like I think you said it before, is doing that type of generation in a procedural manner that helps us as developers kind of move forward, right? And that's super important. But that does bring us into differentiating out between our game lore and story development, and like what are the pieces in that, right? So in our previous conversations, we talked through this and we talked about setting, right? That is where the player is. That is what's going on. Um, I know on the pen and paper side, you have a lot of, you describe the setting, you present this to the players, visually in a media, television, they see it, but there's a whole slew of tricks that a director might take to present, hey, this is supposed to be scary, this is supposed to be fun. Color grading, right?
Oh, all of it. That's the whole thing is how do you make the audience feel moment
Yeah,
by moment?
yeah, exactly. You have sound, and I'm sure we'll get into sound and music and all that stuff in a future video.
Mm.
Um, But
Well,
I
there
remember.
was that note about the music, the recall aspect of what it does for narrative, and that you can
Mhm.
anchor emotions. This the great thing as well about narrative in general, its ability to do retroactive calls
Yeah,
with the person. So if you want them to experience it, you anchor things psychologically. So music, for example, is a great thing. You play a tune when the character's in a place where everything is great and fine, and they feel good about that. So the association when you hear that song subconsciously is a good thing. And then later you go through everything. You go through the trials and the fire, and you're changed. You're a different person. And then you hear the music again, and suddenly it links back to where you heard it the first time, and you have that immediate retroactive like lightning bolt of the whole journey you took to get there, and it reminds you of
yeah.
all of it.
And I remember when we first talked about this, it was with the Morden Solus, right? The Solarian character from Mass Effect, where he sings
Right.
kind of a change of the Gilbert and Sullivan, right? I am the scientist Solarian, and it's fun and it's kind of goofy the first time you hear it in Mass Effect 2, and then Mass Effect 3. When you decide to cure the genophage, he goes up there and he starts singing this song as he does this. And man, you want to talk about an emotional kick in the nuts.
Damn.
Like I
I didn't realize it
and
was cross games. That's epic.
yeah, no, I will give. And so people give the Mass Effect writers a little bit of grief, well, fair bit of grief for Mass Effect 3, but Drew Karpyshyn was the writer for Mass Effect 1, 2, and I think half of 3. Um, and he did a lot of things that were brilliant throughout the series. A lot of is very Doctor Who in how they manage some of these larger storylines, right? But that particular bit of direction is flawless, absolutely flawless. Like when I heard him sing that and I knew he was about to die, I was just like, oh man, like really? You guys are gonna
Takes you
do this to
back.
me?
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting here cutting onions while watching this cutscene.
Oh. Have you
Like
guys seen
God,
Avatar 2? On that note, have you seen Avatar 2?
I have not. I have not.
I have not either now.
I really, really liked it. I won't get into it too much, but there was a lot of that, a lot of recognition of passage of time, and I don't want to say nostalgia, but really the appreciation of time and linking linking moments in time is
Okay.
amongst other things. It's a brilliant film, but anyway.
Well, and that type of thing does when a director or a writer or you name it is able to bring that around for a storyline, it enriches that storyline. Now you're going to remember that storyline forever,
Mm,
right? And that's what you want.
yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to feel epic. It doesn't have to feel like you were the focus of it, because clearly in this storyline, you weren't the focus of it. Now, you made some decisions that allowed it to happen, but it wasn't your fight. Um, it was somebody else's, trauma and guilt that was dealt into it. But man, if you didn't feel every bit of it, every
Mm.
step of the way.
So if I could right there, I think there's a really interesting point that brings it back to the way film and TV works, the way like narrative works,
Yeah.
traditionally speaking, is through the prescription of coverage and cameras and shots and all that stuff. You get to create scenarios that can be where the way out is preconceived. So what I mean by that is a hero in any story gets to this moment, at this eventual moment where they end up in a situation you cannot imagine a way out of, and then they do. Somehow
Hmm.
that person does it. And it's after that, after they do it, that's when you realize they're a hero. That is the audience's recognition of, oh, that's a hero because they did something I couldn't have imagined. So a lot of that, one of the the mantras they say, or the phrases they use about writers, that writers aren't the people who have the ideas; they're the ones who take the time to figure them out. And where I apply that is when you're trying to, you write yourself into a corner, you write your character into a corner, and then you spend 3 months. figuring out how can I get this guy out of this real life impossible scenario.
Hmm.
And it takes you 3 months, and on screen it takes the character 3 seconds, 3 minutes maybe. And it's that compression where you're like, holy shit, how do they do that? And that's where I think a lot of the feeling comes from. So the segueing into the game aspect of it, what you just mentioned about you helped somebody else, it wasn't your fight, right? I think that was a really clever mechanism now to think about it, because it allowed you to involve yourself in that same arc where you watch somebody else do something you couldn't have imagined, but still having your own first person experience and just being right next to it will happen. So you're a sidecar to the actual hero's journey. Because it's hard to prescribe that hero's journey when you can change everything. If because then it means the game would be so hard that within 3 seconds you would have to figure something out that's impossible. So it's hard to get the
Hmm.
narrative heroes resolved from a game unless you're next to somebody else doing it, which I think is brilliant about that game.
So what I want to point out here is you hit on something brilliant that is prevalent in some of my favorite, especially fantasy novels, where you have this hero in this obnoxious, like, all the odds are stacked against them. They are screwed, right? And it's funny because some of these novels I've read, and I'm talking about like Dragonlance novels, Forgotten Realms novels. These are the IPs of very famous Dungeons and Dragons pen and paper properties. It almost feels like they run these novels after playing a game, right? They've got their characters, they play their game, and then the author goes, all right, here's kind of what happened. So I'm going to turn this into a story because you
Mm,
have fairly creative BS that happens
mm,
that and one example I give, and I forget if it's the second or third book in the it's the Hunt for Mithril Hall in Forgotten Realms. You have your main characters, your Driss Stewardin, your Bruenor Battlehammer, very famous Forgotten Realms characters. And there's a point where Bruenor, a dwarf, he basically had flaming barrels attached to his back, rides his way down to the forges of Mithril Hall, which is a very it's a dwarven fortress that he's trying to recover. Think like what's the play Moria in Lord of the Rings, right?
mm-hmm.
So he
The
rides
dwarves.
his way down to the forges, crashes his dragon in, kills the dragon, which was the point of it. Um, and now he's surrounded by all these evil dwarves, and he's trying to figure out his way out, and he crawls into a forge because what do forges need, right? Ventilation, right? That smoke's got to go somewhere, right? And climbs up this chimney
How does he survive the fire, the heat?
because he had one of the other characters enchanted scimitars, which a book prior, actually several books prior, was known to prevent that character from taking heat damage. He had that tied to his
Wow.
pack.
Do you
Okay.
think the writer knew he was going to do that event later,
I
or he
have
just created the
no I have
opportunity?
no idea, but it was such a like, huh, this is brilliant. And it sounds like the type of bullshit that a pen and paper player would come up with.
No, 100% you're right about that because that's really the shining part. I know what you're talking about, where Shimmergloom is dead
Yeah,
and he's
yeah,
got to deal
exactly.
with all the Duergar. But I think that may have been the second book, but again, not gospel. Yeah, as a tabletop storyteller, a lot of what happens, like the real magic moments, like the real memorable stuff like that, is when I, as a GM, have forgotten what's in my players' packs. I throw something at them meant to be world ending, meant to be like, how could you possibly overcome this? And I watch my players, like, they will take out an object that I forgot they had, they'll stack together things in a way that I didn't intend them to, and all of a sudden my thing that I thought was going to be like really terrible for them to deal with it's not so much they've trivialized it. It's just more like they come up with ways to think outside of the box, like so far outside of my realm of thinking. Because when you've got 4 or 5 people putting their heads together on something, and you're trying to stump them with a riddle essentially, or like present them with a problem, most of the time it's the tools they have available and their ingenuity, right? So yeah, it does lead to things like that. And I've had specific things like what you're talking about happen, where I think I've thrown them this big thing, and a player's like, well, but wait, what about this thing I've got? And it's like, oh yeah, no, I guess that would work. Yeah. Like, hmm. And then it's like, yeah, again, you go back to now all of a sudden the cats have gotten out of the gate and they're all over the property, and you're like, well, I guess we got to herd them back somehow. But
Right?
you win this time, player. No, I'm just kidding.
Who gave them all
some,
this power? Oh,
yeah,
it's me.
some GMs really want to kill their players. I don't do that kind of storytelling myself. It's not like a me versus them thing, but at certain times, you plan something again, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, this is gonna be super cool, and they're like, oh, well, I have this in that example. It's like, well, I have this item that makes me not die if I'm in really hot environments. So I'm just gonna climb out, and you're like, yeah, fair enough, I
Touche.
guess. Yeah,
But for
well
the
played, sir.
player, that is the ultimate. Like, you
Oh
want
yeah,
to talk about your
Mm.
dopamine hit, the psychology of like
yeah.
that risk reward. I did it. I was presented with an absolute natural one. This should have killed me, but I figured it out.
Oh yeah,
That
they'll be
is,
telling that story for the
Yeah.
next
yeah,
decade.
they'll be telling that
So
as if they did it as a person.
does
Mhm.
that mean that you have to remember that you had that enchantment and that's your way? And what happens if you don't? What happens if you can't be the hero and think of the brilliant solution in time? Like how do you get them there?
Well,
Well,
from
that's
a
just it.
video,
And
go ahead,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, go ahead. I was going to say the tabletop part of it because that's my bag. But
Well,
from
from
a tabletop
yeah,
standpoint, it's real easy. You
from a
just say,
video,
oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
So-
You go first. This is
you.
no, this is your
Someone
thing.
go. I'm gonna
This is
pick.
your party.
From a video game perspective, you deal with systems, right? And this is what Baker was talking about, where you're talking about systemic development in terms of games, in terms of things going on. Um, you deal with systems, and the advantage that players have on a video game is they're never truly dead, right? The only video games that have handled permadeath have like people played them for a couple months and then the character dies and they were done, right?
Mm.
So the mechanic allows for players to go back and try again. So eventually they will learn those systems. They will learn to lose it or use the abilities that they have. And the other advantage they have is they're in VR. It's not take a game like Elden Ring or Dark Souls, right? I run into the boss's chamber. I have to dodge and attack in a certain pattern in order to kill the boss, right? That's not in VR. In VR, it's I have a sword and I swing a certain way and I get past the boss's defenses and I hit him. That's important. I cast magic using the runes that I know. And I mean, Con, you've seen our magic system
Yeah,
live
it's
at
pretty sweet.
work, where you legitimately have to remember the runes that you can cast in air that create the spell for you.
Yeah.
Um, all of this is systemic level stuff that, as a player, you can take advantage of. And as we get, more magic items, stuff like that, I, to be honest, I would love to be able to recreate something as epic as Bruner's ride down to the forges on Shimmergloom, and then the unassing into the forges because he's got an enchanted scimitar on his back, right? That would be so cool.
Yeah. So that moment is epic, I'm sure by itself, but is also mostly epic because of the past, right? Like everything
Hmm.
that's taken to get there. Okay.
Yeah, you build up to it, right? I think at that point, in Baker, correct me if I'm wrong, they thought Drist, who is generally the main character of these novels, they thought he was dead, right? He
Yes.
had gotten in a fight with um, Artemis Entreri, who is a assassin who is hell bent on both stealing a halfling friend of theirs who stole an enchanted gem from, a high-ranking noble. But also, Artemis was this incredibly gifted swordsman who wanted to kill Drist because he wanted to be the best, and Drist represented a threat to that, right? And Drist was a member of the Drow race who, have more time than most humans to learn swordsmanship and all sorts of stuff like that. Not getting into the whole of the Forgotten Realms IP, which is deep. It is incredibly deep.
Hmm.
Great books, by the way. But, that talks to, a different type of setting, a different type of lore, which, we take cues from that. What are these things that we remember? Now, for FromLight, talking about our setting, the setting is kind of similar to your I don't want to say stereotypical because nobody wants to describe their own IP as stereotypical. Um,
No,
but you
some
have a dark.
familiar
What's that?
traits. Some
Yeah,
familiar traits.
yeah, because fantasy is most fantasy is defined as being Tolkien-esque or otherwise. So FromLight starts in a dark fantasy world. The world's name is Tir Ariad. Magic comparatively rare, technologically similar to Western Europe between about 1100 and 1350. Um, Humans are dominant within their enclosed spheres, meaning like where they have defensibility in their capital cities. Outside of that, you have monstrous races. Travel is not safe. There's a reason why, if you're looking at the screenshot we have in the background, this is a village that is outside of um, that sphere, that bubble, that protective bubble. And you'll notice they have a palisade all the way around, right? A lot of fantasy games, and I think we talked about doing tropes next time we got together, which is going to be just absolutely fun. And I don't want to spoil that one. But one thing that you find in a lot of fantasy games is they just have a village. There might be a dragon living next door, or hordes threatening. And it's just a village, no wall, no nothing. It doesn't make sense, right? Um, so the wild's extremely dangerous. Travel conducted in large caravans. I know we had talked previously about being able to use mechanics like that for story-driven kind of narration. The magic in this world is provided through elemental and kind of divine affinities, and the divinity is nested in outsiders who, to us, are completely alien. Think very Lovecraftian, right? They gain power through their kind of their portfolio, their space, their emotion being expressed, not so much anything else. And they really don't care about humanity or any other race, what have you. So as a setting, you have already a lot of conflicts inherent in that, things that could happen. Your video game typical storylines that you would have, right? Moving forward into the lore, because setting is the world as you have, lore is what came before, and the both of these together combine and give you your story arcs, right? When you're talking about a television show, you don't necessarily have that much lore, unless it's a IP that is much larger than the lore itself. And a good example I'll give for that is The Witcher, right? The Witcher has multiple video games, multiple books. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes behind this television show. The danger you have with things like that is when you stray from that, the fandom gets really pissed off. Or
You
actually,
get Red Shirt guy from the World of Warcraft development talk,
yeah.
where he corrects them about their lore on stage. Real quick, before we get too into like the mechanisms of lore, like in other things,
Yeah,
I've actually been kind of curious about this myself. Can you go over like the lore of your game's world?
absolutely.
Like if you have that, like I'm not trying to like put you on the spot. I'm just interested in like I know a little bit about it, but like if you had to like summarize like the FromLight like eras or like the ages, so to speak, like how would you classify or how would you break those up versus like
Y-
where we are now jumping as a player?
Yeah. So we're talking about a roughly 6,000 year recorded history span, right? In FromLight, we have, roughly negative 3,000 to 0, which is what's considered the Forlorn era. And the Forlorn are a race, they're akin to, a Fey race, elves, and at that time, humanity were pretty much slaves to them, right? Um, or, living at the very fringes of the wild. There's a point where their magic became corrupted, the majority of them disappear, and the humanity rebels against the remainder, which is the start of the Dawn era. That lasts, roughly about 800, 877 years, give or take. Humanity achieves independence, a majority, and then, of course, with humans, you start giving them some power, and they're gonna fight against each other, right? It's what we do. Um, rise and fall of various civilizations. Probably have another, 1,200 years of this. And then included in there, we have what's called the breaking. And now I'm not going to dig too deep into the breaking because there's a lot of story arc stuff there that we want to keep fresh for the players, right?
Sure.
But it's a cataclysmic event that changes the face of Tir Ariad. Um, nations have to shift because of it. There are still, artifacts and, you know, uh, you know, cultural demographic changes because of it. But that brings us into what we call the Dragon Era, which is about 1,000 years of continued war, magic becoming rarer and rarer, and the center of powers of kingdoms starts to consolidate and like shrink. So now you have these wild frontiers that are growing again, and the area becomes more dangerous, but also more lucrative because, of course, when you're competing for resources, anywhere that doesn't have that competition is rich in resources. And into the current era, which is wars, military actions, plagues, just a lot of conflict going on as the players, kind of discover this world. It's a world in strife, right? And the kingdom that they will find themselves in is a kingdom of Rentier, which is, a kingdom that is at war from multiple angles for a fairly long time, having just beaten back an internal rebellion to the point where, a normally patriarchal society has said, hey, women can become knights because we are that strapped for fighting people.
Mm.
Okay. They're fighting a foe who is it's the theocracy of Erdern. And the problem, you talk about a regular war. The problem is that the soldiers of Erdern just don't seem to die. So now you have this very tough, like the Rentari leadership is on their like, they think their kingdom is gone. And that's where the players find themselves in this game, with the opportunity to potentially change the results of, the world around them. So
So
sorry,
you're kind
that's
of like in the huddled masses, right? So like you're and I do want to talk about like when you first drop into the game and like kind of like how you will progress through it to begin with. But as far as like your story arcs, right? when you as a player, and I do want to talk about like how you see other like the various like let's call them factions or the
Yeah,
various like groups
absolutely.
involved in this. I would love to touch on that next, but the as far as like you go as a player, when you first drop in, you're like you're basically, I won't say on the side of, because I get the feeling that you're not on the side of anyone at first, but like you're kind of dropped into the situation where it's like this kingdom that you interact, your first environment, right?
Hmm.
These people are terrified because they're like, oh, this other military force could sweep through here and just crush us on a whim, and they don't die.
Yeah.
Like, is that kind of like so people are? It's kind of like I don't know if you guys have ever read Eaters of the Dead or watched the 13th Warrior, where
Oh,
there's like
13th
this
Warrior,
kind of
love that movie.
yeah. Eaters of the Dead is actually the book that's based on. It's excellent, by the way, if you get a
Michael
chance.
Crichton.
Yes, that's
Yep.
correct.
Oh,
Okay.
really?
It's kind of like one of those things where it's like it's this thing that like it's on the periphery to the. Do you see it as being like the Ven, right? Where it's like
Yep.
it's on the periphery of like if you, unless you're crushed by it, you literally almost don't even believe in it. Or is this like everybody's like they know it's a thing now? You're the fifth village in from that border where they know the next three villages towards that border have been totally dominated by this force? Or do you see it more as being like a, oh, I hear they don't, you know, oh, I hear this nonsense going on. We're all gonna be fine, you know, or, you know what I mean? Like, how does what do you think like the vibe is as
I,
far
I
as like when you
think
drop in?
I think you're striking the balance between the two, right? And it's
Hmm.
very you saw this in 2020 with the coronavirus and all that stuff where it's not real until it affects somebody next to me.
Yeah,
It's
you
not
nailed it
real
on the head.
until it affects me.
Yeah, you hit that squarely on
Um,
the head.
these villages have had to give up some of their sons to this war. They don't know if they're getting them back.
Mm.
They have no contact because of course in a dangerous world to pass mail between cities you have to have armed escorts. Well, if all of your armed escorts are dedicated to the war effort, you no longer have mail. Okay?
Wait, to pass a mail, like to travel as a mail between cities, you
No,
need an
to
escort.
travel like actual letters,
Oh, got it.
communication.
Sorry, mail. Got it. Got
Yep.
it. Sorry.
Um,
It's like the guards are mails,
and
probably.
and here you also have issues with other organizations that are acting as spoilers in this. We have an organization in the game, and this is actually when we initially got the grant from Meta. Um, the whole scenario was you were a captive of the Finders Guild, which is kind of a best way to describe it. It's kind of a rent a slave organization. We need 100,000 or 100 conscripts for this war, right? They call the Finders Guild. Finders Guild gives them a bunch of people who owe money. Okay. Just not good guys. There's no way to cast the Finders
Mm.
Guild in the like as good guys. You know, it's just like
They're just kind of like dyed in the wool war profiteers, like
yeah, they're providing they're job creators.
yeah. So it's like they
Slavers.
could, on the
Yeah,
one hand, they could sell you a bunch of slaves to go conquer your neighbor, but when your neighbor wants to pay you back, they could just be the same guys selling your neighbor
exactly.
people to come pay you back. Yeah, literal
Right.
war profiteers. Yeah, true
Yeah,
sense
but
of the term.
what they also do is they also use these slaves to go delving through barrows and dungeons and what have you because you know if they let 100 slaves die but the 101st slave finds a little treasure cache, everything's paid off. They're good. They've gotten
Mm.
theirs. They don't care about people, right? So that's kind of how we want to start this. That's the tutorial, and we'll have to adapt that to a multiplayer context, which we've already done with the Meta grant, the Launchpad grant. But then you
Well,
end up in this town,
which
right?
is Dolan, you said?
Dolan. Yes, the name of the town is Dolan.
Okay,
You've escaped from the Finders Guild. You're a fugitive. All right. And don't get me wrong, the Finders Guild, like any other bureaucratic organization, they keep very good paperwork. They know who you are, right?
sure.
So you are in Dolan. You have the world is your oyster, right? You have prospects, you have everything that's going on. Now, for our sake, from a development perspective, getting away from the storyline, we also have to engage in a lot of experimental kind of levels, gameplay, etc. Because we are in VR, right? Um, on average, a VR player is willing to have a 30-minute to hour and 30-minute play session. So for that, we have to make sure that we can meet that. Now, we're going to find that some people and our general audience is either going to be that on the high end or the low end, and we have to guide our development towards that. So you might find, smaller but more frequent quests. We're, building that up, or longer and less frequent quests. So that's kind of the development, the technological side of that. And our story writing, our storytelling has to match that because, you know, you could tell the best story in the world, but if it doesn't match your player base, it's not going to work. Period.
Mm.
Oh, absolutely. That's something that we see all the time in
Yep.
my particular thing is like some player groups have got 4 hours to sit around and play. Some players will play 6 hours a night, 3 nights a week. Some players it's
Yeah.
4 hours a month. It's like
Yeah, absolutely. But to get to your original question, talking about when the player shows up, they're in the town of Dolan, which Dolan is at the outskirts of civilization. It is somewhat near the border of Erdern via, water. It's in an area that is festooned with mines, barrows, ruins, some history with the group that tried to rebel against the Rentieri throne. Came to that area, came to that forest to try to reconsolidate their forces. The Rentieri army came down, basically shattered them, and now those are the bandit groups in the area. So you have just a rife situation for all sorts of conflict for this one town that's just trying to, make a buck and live, right? Like, these guys, yeah, these guys are, um, trying to not, lose their lives while they're out on the outskirts of civilization. But where they are, it's fairly profitable. So that
Or,
that kind of, or sorry, go ahead.
so, you might have to tell me the names of the kingdoms again, but there's the main ruling kingdom that thwarted a rebellion
Yep,
and
and that's
pushed those
Rentier.
Rentier is the kingdom.
Yep.
So Rentier thwarted a rebellion from Erdern.
No, the rebellion was internal.
Internal, I see. And so the bandits who are out in the woods. Sorry, I guess my ultimate question is, the player when they start in the Finders Guild, where like are they on a side? Are they on Rentier's side, the Kingdom side, or on the Rebellion side, or where are they?
So the Finders Guild mission is basically our tutorial, right? Um,
Got it.
we get the ability to introduce the players to a number of different mechanics in the game. They're on nobody's side at that point. They're a slave, right?
And
And
the Finders Guild is on nobody's side either.
no, they're on whoever's side pays.
Got it.
And as Baker said, the ultimate war profiteers.
Mm.
Um, so for the players, they will escape the Finders Guild through doing this tutorial, and the tutorial is pretty much on rails, right? There's no branching storylines, you can't fail it, you can't succeed, well, you can succeed it, but you end up in the town of Dolan from this Finders Guild expedition gone wrong. And from there, it's literally on you to make yourself as a player. And what we want to fully do is handle players who want to do bad things, evil things, selfish things, and handle the players who want to be the heroes, right? Because I think that's important in an RPG, is giving players that agency of choice.
So I have a question. Um, in a character story, in a narrative, you're always tracking what the person wants.
Yep.
And you're really what builds everything up, what builds the stakes is clearly defining what they want and then constantly putting obstacles in their way. And you relate to them by seeing how they deal with that, right? Seeing what options or what decisions do they make. Decisions are the number one exposure of character. Um, the challenge in VR is how do you okay, here's a question before I propose a challenge. Question is when you leave the Finders Guild, what do you want as a player? What do you want?
I think for that one is agency, freedom. The idea is the players will be through, and what we did with the Oculus grant was we put players on a track that was almost parallel to the rest of the Finders Guild, right? So as you go through, you find the secret door, you make your way in, and now you're presented with this undead, right? That you destroy the undead, you meet a friendly ghost who, depending on how you talk to him, may or may not give you an enchanted mace that dissolves under sunlight, because of course I can't give you awesome magic items that early in the game. But you end up fighting a bunch of other undead, and that enchanted mace has more effectiveness towards them because they're skeletons, and maces, skeletons, it all works. But what you see if you're observant is a wide open chasm, and across the way, the remainder of the Finders Guild being chased down by a horde of this undead. So they're dying, right?
Mhm.
You make your way through a small encampment that's the remainder of the Finders Guild in that area, and you escape. And that's the end of the mission, right? You are in the mountain pass over the town of Dolan. That's actually the main menu of our game, which is this mountain pass overlooking Dolan. And then when you go into the game, you're, of course, in Dolan.
So here's
And
the sorry,
yeah,
go ahead, finish.
well, I mean, for us, it's literally at that point you are now in the game. The world is your oyster, but the question is, what do you want to become? Like, what do you want to do with yourself? Do you
So
want to
I,
join? And I know, well, talking something that Baker brought up in one of our previous conversations, where you have an adventurers guild, right? And you talk about this group of people that is designed for people like you, but also is kind of opposing the Finders Guild. These people who were already positioned to enslave you and take away your agency. So right there, you just have a slew of things that can create this narrative, create this ability for you to have an enjoyable play experience, to be perfectly honest.
my question there is coming out of the Finders Guild scenario. You're left in a situation at the main menu where you have a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of
Mhm.
ways that you can go, and you get to really kind of, as a character, you get to discover yourself in that world and your purpose. I think one of the really important tenets of film and story, or TV and film like characters, is having a really clear super objective. So in the interim, in the short term, they may have something that they want to do, but ultimately it's all means to an end. So my question here is in this game and considering other games that have multiple endings where you can actually determine a different ending,
Mhm.
how clear is the super objective and is it worth having one for the player when they leave the tutorial? They're not left with a lot of like we don't want them to be aimless. So can they have a larger objective like I my life want to be a filmmaker, but ultimately I want to have the resources to be able to help people. That's my super objective. And the means to get there is to do film and stuff. So is there something like that?
Yeah, and I think for us in this game, we're looking at this as presenting the players, um, giving him the option to be aimless to start, right? You talk to people, and the people you talk to in the town of Dolan are going to start to create some of these super objectives, these arcs that you can go down. And then you start to decide, do you want to oppose these evil forces that are threatening the good people of Dolan and Rentier and the overall world? Or do you want to join them? Maybe you want to go back to the Finders Guild. Maybe you want to join the Adventurers Guild. There are these arcs, these organizational arcs that we can present. And then what we as developers need to do is to adjust the world state to adapt um, to these arcs and ensure that the players are feeling like their actions are actually having a impact on the world that they see when they log in, right?
Mm.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. I think it brings up a lot of other questions, which is like how do you then merge those storylines and stuff. But that's for you to deal with.
Well, and it's the branching arcs, right? And BioWare does this brilliantly with a lot of their games, where you are given a number of choices and you play through the ramifications of those choices, but those choices all come back to a focal point. And how you play that focal point is defined by your choices, right? And then that branches out again, but those branches are colored by your choices in the previous arc, but it's not so much that it's an exponential difference of choice, right? It's constrained choice, if you will.
Yeah, so what I have written here is the first during the conversation I wrote a question which is what does the player want, which is what I asked. And then what I've written after that is create a player want. I feel like that is ultimately what this
Mm-hmm.
semi choose your own adventure thing is. It's not quite on rails, but the story itself has enough circumstances to influence your decision making
Yep.
into some avenues. So you have to create the player want.
And one advantage we have is um, players are kleptomaniacs. Okay,
Can confirm.
we have already built up, and so our weapon system, as you know very well, Khan, is physically based, right? A sword
Mm,
has weight, it has a feel to it. Um, a two-handed sword, if you're very weak, will require two hands to use effectively. If you're very strong, you might be able to use it with one hand.
mm,
We have a modular weapon system where we're able to dynamically generate a weapon and also dynamically generate how it feels to the player, right? So then we use that to create loot. You know, your classic looter shooters, which are your Borderlands, Diablo, stuff like that. We can present players with these dynamic levels of loot where they're constantly looking for the new best shiny. Um, that's honestly, it's a very easy game mechanic to exploit when we're talking about why would players want to go do something? Well, because there's a big bad guy there and he probably has an awesome sword or
mm.
axe or spear. Okay. As base as it sounds, it's an absolutely valid motivation for players to do something. Um, but then you take that forward, and if you wrap it all together, players still get that dopamine hit from I've got the new shiny, but it's the storyline that makes them feel like that new shiny is worth it. It's something
Worth it.
cool. Yeah.
Mm.
So you definitely have to put both of those together and make that work out.
That's great.
That's
As
one
you're
of the
saying that,
oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. Quick thing, I'll let you. As you were saying that, I was like, oh, it's interesting. I feel like we're arriving at what game developers have been doing for a while, like with the incentivization
Oh
behind
yeah.
loot and weapons and Well, I'm arriving at that. Obviously, you already have this laid out.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
jives really well with the tabletop aspect of things too. You'll wind up with players that their sole motivation is to see how powerful they can get, and the story's almost tertiary. But then you have players who they want to get more powerful to progress the story, and that's like their primary motivation. They're the exact same ends, just with very different motivations.
Absolutely. And we have multiple players who um, they have you've different subsets of the playing population. We talked before about the murder hobos, right? When you have a player, yeah, good term. You have some players who literally just want um, um, you have some players who literally just want the power, the I want the best shiny item that's possible, right? You have some players who they love the storyline, and some players who want to be more powerful to be better at the storyline. We have to account for all of those, right? These players are, you have a subset, and with the VR game, any game really, you have players that are going to play it for multiple reasons. There's some players who play Mass Effect for the gunplay. There's some players who play it for the alien sex scenes.
I was
There's
just
some,
going to say the romance, like me.
yeah,
But continue.
the
Alien
romance.
sector.
We're
Yeah.
bromance. We don't judge.
I, I did your quest. Now come sleep with me.
Hey,
But
that's like sounds like a lot like real life.
yeah,
I was gonna
right,
say,
right.
Get a motivator as any, yeah. Like,
Next time I walk into a bar, I'll walk up to somebody random and be like, "What's your loyalty quest?"
No problem. You're probably the right person. They'll have a good answer.
I was just
Yeah,
gonna
right.
They
say
won't even know what you're talking about.
that's a good way to cast a net. Actually, like
Yeah,
somebody responds to that without hesitation, like you're anyway.
yeah, right. That's probably the new like that should be somebody's Tinder tagline. Like, what is your loyalty quest? God, I hope that.
Abbreviated, just like LYTYQST loyalty quest question mark.
Yep,
That's the next iteration.
that's amazing.
That's perfect.
But you have so many people that you have this like wide net of what people want to get out of a game, and like you said, there are people who play a game and they just do not give a damn about the story. They just want the numbers, they want a min max, they want the shiny weapon. It sucks, but that's the way it is, right?
I mean,
So
I wouldn't say it sucks necessarily. I mean, that's just if that's how people enjoy their game, then
yeah,
okay. Sure, why not? Some people just want to break your game. Some people want to be homesteaders. Some people want to be mercenaries. Some people,
yep.
it's just different strokes for different folks.
I let my nephew beta test FromLight, and you know what he got off on?
Hmm.
He would throw a bow onto the floor, and we had a bug where you could jump on the bow and it would launch you in the air.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's exactly right.
12-year-old
break stuff,
nephew.
Yeah,
12-year-old.
testing limits.
Yeah, 12-year-old nephew. He loved bow acrobatics.
Acrobatics, if you will.
I see what you did there. So how about this? Before we get into kind of the next portion of this, talking about, we briefly touched on the story, but what we want to do is we want to like explore some story arcs. I'm going to recommend we go on a brief break for about 5 minutes here.
Soft 5, if you will. Soft 5.
Soft 5. And we'll be back in roughly 5 minutes.
Sweet.
Perfect.
All right.
BRBCs.
Yep.
No head.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Also, I had a genius idea. I think that for anybody who comes back and watches in the future, I think this is just my vote. I think you should give them a secret code they can enter on the site to get something cool. Only the first 25 people, though.
That'd be cool.
Sorry, I gotta go off mute on my mic. We definitely need to start refining how we're doing the stream. There's a lot of engagement and stuff that we could bring into this that needs to happen. But of course, this is our first stream, right? And I'm by no means an expert in setting this type of stuff up. It
We'll
almost,
we'll
yeah,
settle in.
yeah,
It's calibration
yeah,
round.
right.
How many do we have people watching?
Right now I'm seeing, aside from Mendu, like 12.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah.
Sweet. Hello, 12
Well,
people.
yeah. Top end was 12, but
I've
I
always
think
I've always
now
said
we're
it, and I'll
9.
I'll say it again. There are about 10 people I like on the planet, and so there's right there. See, there's
All of them right there, right?
it just doubled is what I was gonna say. 'Cause
Yeah.
those 12 people I like very much intrinsically and implicitly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even if it
Well,
just helps one person.
yeah, and realistically, this is one of those things where, I know we had talked about throwing it out on a podcast and getting it published that way. Um, this is the type of content that a lot of people really, really want to see. From, indications I've talked to people, and because you can find a technical guide to doing something like game dev anywhere, right?
Sure.
Um,
I love
you
the way you
know,
put it. The soft side of game dev. I think that's great. And even when you said that to me, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, and I can see how a lot of other people would use this and benefit from it because like the high level concept, how do you even approach a game
yeah,
or merging a story into a game?
yeah.
Huge.
And I mean, and you're very well aware, learn.unrealengine.com, for us working with Unreal Engine, is actually dev.epicgames.com now. I need to change that, but it still redirects. Um, when you're talking about the technical aspects of game dev, what can you do to create a technical game? How do you code it? How do you script it, etc.? That's available. That's very common stuff. Okay.
Mm.
But the difference between making a game that has good mechanics and a trash story, which, people might play it for the mechanics, but there's nothing drawing them there. Whereas the games that people truly remember are the ones that like actually pull at them.
Mm.
You know, you have that emotional involvement with the story. It draws you in, it makes you care about it. Those are the ones people remember. You know, I used to play Counter-Strike back in the day. Played it for a long time. This was the Counter-Strike 1.0, Counter-Strike Source. Never got into
Damn.
the next one.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I stopped at 1.6.
yeah,
Yeah, 1.6
but
Or
also,
source.
yeah.
Source
Well,
is
I
up to
guess I
6.
played some Source, yeah.
yeah, Source was a good update to Counter-Strike. But once I stopped playing Counter-Strike, there was nothing that was like, oh man, I'm nostalgic for Counter-Strike. I
Mm.
care about Counter-Strike. The story was so good, right? Because I had none.
10 out
It
of 10,
is,
best story. You heard it here first.
yeah,
What was it?
It's a 10 out of 10, best story. You heard it here first.
right.
Counter-Strike.
Deathmatch.
Sounds like a Yelp
Done.
review. But and then we're talking about games that like legitimately had interesting storylines. Like, of course, for me, you have Mass Effect, right? Talking about, when Mass Effect 1 came out, Mass Effect 2 came out, and I just could not wait for Mass Effect 3. That scene where you're leaving Earth at the beginning, like that was like, oh fuck, man. That's real. Like that was visceral for me as a
Hmm.
player. And
And
I
what made it
still,
visceral?
oh, the music, the sound, the feeling of, your ship coming in to pick you up while you're watching all the Reapers come down and just wreck buildings. Like,
The cinema merged with the story,
yeah,
like getting the full sensory experience plus the knowledge that you're being saved.
yes. Whoever did, and that colored that entire game, and that was one of the brilliant things they did, where you knew Earth was under siege. Every moment you took time to do something in that game, more people on Earth were dying. And there were various little allusions to that throughout the game. I think there's a couple times you talk to the Admiral Anderson. What's the name of the actor who played him? This is gonna make me mad. Admiral Anderson, Mass Effect. Keith David. Keith
Hmm.
David played him. So you had a very capable voice actor playing this person who's calling you up and saying, hey, yeah, it sucks. People are dying every day, numerous times throughout that game. And that just made that initial I'm leaving Earth to get more support that much more meaningful, that much more visceral, and you
So
you remember it.
I have a thought, but going back to the whole what I'll just kind of coin as traditional narrative. When I say that, I mean TV and film.
Yeah.
So in traditional narrative, you have your internal character want, you're tracking that, you're prescribed it. We established earlier. I asked the question, what does the player want? So by the time you get out of the Finders Guild, you're left open to make your own decisions and to find your own want.
Hmm.
And then we went to creating a player want. And now, and the last thing you just said about the consequence of if you don't proceed, people die. What I realized, that's a negative want. And what's great about that is you can leave what you want open for the player decide while still having a constant negative want of what the player does not want to happen. And that can put pressure and stakes that influences them to the positive one. And it sounds like in that, I forget which game it was, but you don't want these people to die. You keep being
Yeah.
reminded people are dying, so it forces you forward, pushes you forward.
Yeah. And so that actually is a perfect segue into what I want to talk about, where um, we have this player showing up in Dolan, right? They're going to interact with the townsfolk, hopefully, create some kind of rapport with, these AI characters, get to know some storylines, do some, basic missions, your classic, hey, bandits have attacked my brothers, what's going on? I need to go find the brothers, etc., right? But then we need to talk about a real thing that happens. Okay, you're in this town, you're semi-invested for as much as a player can be invested in AI characters at that short of a distance because we don't have multiple games to set up this narrative.
Hmm.
So now we're talking about a, creating a story arc that immediately grabs the player, right? And now for us, what we have immediately available, we have a number of factions. Okay, and I'm posing this out as kind of an open-ended thing to riff off of how we create this storyline in real time for the viewers that we have. Um, so going into the factions, we got these bandits, right? We know they're rebels against the Renteri thrones. What the player might not immediately know is that they still have aspirations to the throne, right? And they're working through intermediaries of a cult that works with the theocracy of Erdern. So that's the kingdom that's at war with Rentir. Okay. That cult is looking for artifacts, barrows, ruins in the mountains around the town of Dolan, because they are, hell bent on practicing the art of necromancy. That's, raising the dead, etc., because that appeases their patron, who is essentially the god of suffering, but also they're acting as these intermediaries. So you have kind of two tied ones there, and then you have the Finders Guild, right? They're these slavers in this area. For them, a small town like Dolan is ideal because it's doesn't have support. Not it's defensible, but it relies on the people of Dolan to defend it, and that's a fair bit of profit for them. And then to maybe push a little bit of a narrative prompting, let's say a inhabitant of Dolan comes down with a plague that historically is known to be created by this evil god, right? Contact with the evil god's artifacts, spawn this plague in people, and somebody in Dolan has come down with it. So now, as professional story smiths, what do you do with that?
Have you as a player come down with it?
No.
How severe is the outbreak? What are the stakes? Like, what are the consequences of it?
The last time it broke out, it basically infected every kingdom on the planet and was akin to the Black Plague.
What are your options for things that you can do about it?
I was just gonna say I can warm up this car a little bit if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, hit it.
Okay, so you've got this guy who's got this plague, or person, whomever, we know, guy, girl, whatever. I feel like first and foremost,
we're gonna make it a 11-year-old girl.
Okay, see, I was just about to say who it is gonna already guide people's behaviors. Like a lot of players in a lot of games like really have kind of I hate to say a savior complex, but let's just call it a strong inclination towards saving people, especially people that they see as vulnerable, right? So you start out with what are the stakes in the world? Yeah, it could be this plague resurfacing and wreaking hell across the lands, right? But from a personal standpoint, what are your stakes? Do you turn your back on this girl? Do you kill this girl? Because like if you kill her and throw her body in the fire right now, hey, plague stop, baby, bada bing, bada boom, we're out, right? Does it make you a monster? As a GM, I will tell you that I will have something bad happen to you later. Somebody will have seen what you did, or somebody will come by and say, like, "Have you seen my daughter?"
Well, but
yeah.
Also remember, this isn't a plague that came by because somebody got close to an infected thing. This is a plague that came about by magical means. There's an artifact that somebody came into contact with that's presumably still around.
So you've got to talk to her about where have you been? What have you done?
So they thought it was long gone, though, right? That's the idea. Is like this is ancient thing, and now how could this be? It's myth, and
well, I guess you could have to explore that out. Like you could have to tease that out as a player, right? Like you could even make that into something where it's like you have to discover what's happening, and then like maybe you talk to the elder, and he's like, "Well, I heard a story. Maybe talk to this person, they might know something." And you go there and it's like, "Oh yeah, I have my grandpa's journals," and they go through and say, "Oh yeah, here's some info about this," and you say, "Oh, artifact, eh?"
Well, let me get you an answer on the last time that plague came up. So checking my notes, the current time period is about 3352. The last time the plague came up, it raged between 2921 and 2924. So you have roughly 400 years.
Yeah.
In between.
So it's stuff of maybe not legend, but way of the past, not a thing that's present at all.
Yep.
What if you're the first person to interact with this girl post-infection, post-plague, her getting it, you happen to be the first one, and now you have to deal with how does this information even get revealed to everybody else? The question is, what do you even know about it?
Maybe you encounter her like while you're doing something else, and it's like, Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, oh, because then you also you're taking responsibility for this child because you found her sickly outside of town. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
now you pick her up and you carry her back to town because you're like, well, of course, who wouldn't do that? And it's like,
Ooh.
okay, now you're invested. You've saved this girl once already. Are you gonna let her die? You know, like what are you gonna do? You know, Mr. or Mrs. Hero, or you
But
know,
if you
like
pick her up and carry her back to town, do you become
right.
infected?
Oh,
You'd wonder that, right? You'd be like, well, am I
Right?
infected? Am I infecting everybody else that I talk to? You know, like, oh well, I
that's
already
good.
know that, Farmer Smith, who lets me sleep in his his stables just because he's a nice guy. Like I'm supposed to go back to his stables. Am I gonna kill all of his livestock? Am I gonna kill him? You know, like yeah.
Yeah, we had a deal. I had a deal with the guy, and am I going to be good to my word? Am I going to save a bunch of people by either killing this girl or save the girl and the parents by taking her back to town and possibly affecting myself? I think that's a awesome scenario. That's
Yeah,
tough. It's a tough
pretty good.
decision. Great way to start.
Okay. So now, and this is a con question here. What is something we can use to protect the player from the consequences of the plague that's not an absolute MacGuffin?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to the Forge thing, which was I forget which game, but Bruner's ride
Yep.
down, right? And then and eventually escapes through the Forge. That's that idea is you don't realize what gifts you have until later. So it could be a thing that everyone is like, thank you, or the parents like, thank you for bringing my daughter, but you're probably infected, so you gotta go because we'll keep her in quarantine, but you are
Hmm.
ambulatory, you're walking around, so you got to go. And then the presumption is that you're infected, and that's how you feel. You feel like a leper, you've been excommunicated, and that's that. But then, and you go around carrying that secret everywhere else you go, possibly infecting people, which is actually really interesting. That's a really interesting scenario. Not to make it too real, but it's kind of like people who don't tell other people their sexual partners they have STDs. They walk
Hmm.
around with a secret knowing that they could do something to somebody, but does it mean that I'm going to do it anyway because I can get mine? And now, so you as a player thinking you're infected will take all of your actions with you'll be thinking you're making one decision or another. It won't be until way later that you realize you were never infected. You couldn't have been. That's the only way that Bruner could have survived the forge because he had the was it Minotaur that allowed him to escape and whatever it was that was on his back. That's what you have, and that could be significant to your character's journey of
Yeah.
understanding that, like, oh, you are special in that aspect.
See, and I could see an additional thing where maybe we have the cult reach out to the player because in theory they're infected with this dark energy, right? That the cult is very interested in. And the cult can bring them in and say, hey, we will help you if you join us. Or the
Okay.
player has to now search for another option to help themselves. Right? So now we have an actually credible means of enticing the player to either an evil or a good pathway.
Okay. Yes. So on that, what made me think of the larger super objective, the question is, are you from light? And so if you're not infected by this plague, is it because you're from light, so you counteract it, you cancel it out, or is it because you are from darkness, from I forget the name, the Fainway, I think Fainwraith.
Yep.
If you're from there, then that means that you repel it because it's like polarity, the magnetic
Yeah.
polarity, right? So you don't know why you're not infected. It could be either or. Maybe your decisions will determine the outcome that you are from light or you are not from light.
And maybe to add another wrinkle to it, if the players decide to embrace it, because the whole thing is all the players are associated with these gods, these outsiders, right? That's what gives them their magic power. That's what makes them beyond the average, Joe or Jane, soldier, guard, person, peasant, you name it. All of them have this tie in to these outsiders. So maybe they can't get sick, but by embracing their contact to this dark energy and the influence of this cult, we entice the players by saying, hey, you can do this and you can gain a little bit more power, even at your early levels, right? Because that then literally drives into that, what is more important, to be selfish or selfless?
What if your association with the outsider is what was presumably staving off the infection? The fact is,
Exactly.
you do have the infection, but you're actually not being affected by it because you're doing my bidding. And that, imagine, comes down to the runes that you use. Like, you could pull from different kinds of outside. I don't know if the runes are associated with outsiders, but if
They
you
are.
do a lot of evil, oh, they are. So if
Yep.
you do a lot of one outsider's runes, you align with him and you get his protection. And then later it could be that he was manipulating you and you were always
Yep.
immune. And he saw that and decided, I need to capture this person and create a narrative that makes him obey me.
Yeah, so we have a really interesting way, and this is, for the viewers we have, to talk about our magic system, where we tried trying to figure out a actual diegetic, and that kind of means in-world way of managing how magic is done according to archetypes that a typical pen and paper player might be familiar with. And those are pretty much your wizard, your cleric, your warlock, and your sorcerer, right? So for those, your wizard is a type of person that casts their runes and then stores them in a spell book. Okay, and the more they have in the spell book, the less magic they have available to cast on hand. But to cast that spell instantly, they flip to the page in their spell book, they pull the spell out, and they cast it. Right? It's very simple. A sorcerer is somebody that casts the spells without a spell book and they just cast the runes, right? They know the runes, they build them up in real time, and they cast them. A cleric is somebody who may not have magic ability per se, but they have an icon of the deity that they prescribe to, and that icon gives them access to certain runes. So runes that are opposed to their deity, they're going to cast very weak spells to. Runes that are aligned with their deity, they're going to cast very strong spells to. Okay, so they'll be a magic user all the way around, but when you start talking about these runes that are, a rune that is tied to suffering or valor or healing, all those have different connotations, right? And so the warlock is similar to that in that their ability scores, or they are tied to specific runes, but they're not tied to an icon of their deity, right? Their ability scores indicate, their closeness to that, and it's very charisma based. So
Real
the
quick, if
deity,
I could
yeah,
just
go
clarify
ahead.
this: there's clerics, and then wizards, sorcerers, and warlocks. What?
Yes,
Okay, warlocks at the top.
yes. Well, not even at the top, right? All of them have different ways of accessing magic.
I see. So it's not like
And
you don't progress through those levels.
no. And a lot of those ways of accessing magic are purely defined by the player's decision, right? If I'm a player and I find myself not able to cast runes in real time, but I can take my time and cast the rune and put it in a spell book, I'm probably a wizard. Okay?
Mm.
If I'm very good at casting those runes in real time, and I will say this, our gesture recognition is fucking impeccable.
Nice.
It is outstanding.
Nice.
With the exception, our level designer has issues with the rune for fire. Every other rune he's great with, but the rune for fire, I don't. It's literally
I
like
remember.
it's like this. It's
Yeah.
that simple, right? This up down, up across and down. He just cannot cast it. It's amazing.
I remember watching him
The
complain about it.
superpower
Like,
in itself.
Yeah, he is not a firebender. Okay, he is not a
he does.
member of the Fire Nation.
Yeah, he doesn't have the affinity to that
Yeah,
outsider.
right, right. No, it's really quite funny. Um, but the gesture recognition is really good. So if somebody wanted to go in and be able to cast these spells real time, it can happen, right? That's your sorcerer. Now, for your cleric, that's somebody who probably wants to focus less on magic. So unlike most like pen and paper campaigns, we don't have like intelligence and wisdom as ability scores. We have intuition and arcane. So intuition is literally how intelligent your player is, how they can recognize patterns, how they can, how they can spot specific things. It's
Based on experience or based on
well,
base traits.
experience, how methodical they are, just how intuitive that individual is. Arcane is their tie to all things arcane, all things magic. Um, and all players are going to have some arcane score. There's a minimum arcane score because arcane is how you use magic weapons. Somebody with a low arcane score might get a sword to flare up in fire, and that's it. Somebody with a high arcane score might have that same sword where they charge it up and they swing it and it launches like a fire wave in that direction. Okay? That's how the arcane score makes things change. Um, Now, the cleric doesn't necessarily need a high arcane score because they are working through their deity. So the icon that they use will actually level up with them, and that will provide them a surrogate arcane score. That's why these clerics are powerful, because they get all their regular ability scores and then they get this surrogate arcane score, but it's only for the runes that are associated with their deity.
Mm.
Now the warlocks are unique in that they're kind of similar, right? Because a warlock ties themselves to a deity, to one of these outsiders, but they don't need a icon because they're arcane focused. But their power also depends on their charisma, right? So basically their arcane score is how powerful the spells associated with their deity are, and their charisma is how far away from that deity's particular runes they can go. So if they're super
When you say
charismatic, what's that?
when you say away from the ruins, meaning you don't like you will get more benefit from casting runes of the deity you're aligned to, but if you have a high charisma, you get
Yeah.
some more strength with other things.
Imagine the runes in a circle, right?
Mm.
So your deity is at the North Pole of that circle.
Got it.
Normally, the runes at the South Pole of the circle, you're very weak in.
Right.
And as you approach that South Pole, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker. If your charisma is higher, maybe it doesn't get as weak as you proceed southward.
Got it. The charisma buffers your effectiveness away from your alignment.
Exactly. Because it's your ability to internally convince your deity that what you're doing is in their best interest, despite it not being aligned with their power.
Interesting. So your charisma is actually upwards to your deity. I imagine it being the charisma towards other people and your ability to
Oh, it
socially
is.
engineer them, influence. Oh, so
It
it's
is.
both, probably both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's an ability score. That's the beautiful thing we have with VR is we can take ability scores and affect your perceived world in really interesting ways. Just the same way as your strength score determines how well you can swing that sword. Your dexterity determines how well you can pick that lock. Your intelligence or your intuition determines what you can read, right? So all of that drives in. And to bring that back to a narrative perspective, we have different quest updates or quest changes according to what your what your intuition is, what your charisma is, what is going on around you. So for us, if your intuition is high enough, we'll do a check that influences a random check. That might say, hey, I notice footsteps on this path. I notice, footprints rather. So that's where we start to delve really, really hard into the pen and paper realm.
You just get to see more based on your
Hmm.
traits. More is just presented to you without you
Yeah.
necessarily have to do it. So where does it come in that the user is rewarded for being more clever than another user? I think this is where I imagine it becomes difficult, is how do you actually allow somebody, like let's say I feel like I'm a very fast, high reaction player. How do I get to benefit from my human unique abilities in this game? How do I perform better in this game because of
Through
my ability?
systems. Through systems. It's that easy. As
Did they sort
and,
of categorize behavior types, like player behavior types?
well, and I'll give the example of melee combat, right? So melee combat has a number of different aspects to it. It's how you hit a player, where you hit a player, how you parry, not a player, an AI, right? A character. How you
Mm.
parry them, where you parry them. Um, that is the way of that warrior to turn combat from just I am swinging a heavy object to this choreographed dance, right? I'm going to hit you this way because I know it's going to make you stumble that direction, which is going to give me a place to dodge to. So when this other big guy swings, I can get behind him and hit them, right? That's all the advantage that we can bring in VR because you have presence. It's not
Mm.
like a game like Baldur's Gate where I click attack. Okay, I run up to you and I swing. I missed my swing because I rolled poorly. It's not that. In VR, when you hit a swing, you hit a swing, right? But by the same token, the same mechanics we have that manage swings also manage the AI's ability to duck and dodge under your swings. Um, and I'll tell you this, one of my favorite moments developing in VR was creating a predictive sword mechanic whereby I swung a sword at an AI and just a straight right across the chest, and he ducked and dodged, bobbed around me, and swung and hit me from the side.
Nice.
And it
That's
was
wild.
brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant.
Does it work with replication too?
Say that again?
Replication for multiplayer?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Nice.
We basically I just need to apply the animations to it, and we have it working. That's like
Nice.
when you break a system like that down, it is so absolutely like simple. I actually did a dev stream on that maybe a month and a half ago where I created that system on the stream.
Mm. I'll
But
have to go back and watch that later. Actually, I want to get into that on the Unreal side. I want to know how you do that.
yeah, absolutely. But it's such a simple system, and it's really cool for making players feel present. But at the end of the day, with the VR game, that's what it is. Between talking to somebody and having them respond to things that you've done in the past via the story injects that we do, being on a storyline that is relevant to having combat feel like you're fighting somebody real.
Mm.
And maybe because of that difficulty, we as storytellers have to include other options to combat. That's one thing that Baldur's Gate does really well is they've got all these classic, Dungeons and Dragons enemies, these goblins, hobgoblins, drow, you name it. All of them have a non-violent option to progress. But yeah, now we're getting into like deep mechanics. But Yeah. So
Can I
probably go ahead. Go ahead.
question for you, Baker? What are two questions? One,
Shoot.
generally, how long does a story go on for? Like, when does it end? And then second part of that question is, are you drawing conclusive ends for your characters? Like, are you trying to get them to some conclusion, or is it really like procedural all the way?
It depends on the campaign, and it depends on the group. Um, I can only tell you from my standpoint because there's a lot of GMs that run modules, which are basically like point A to point B, and there's a nice payoff at the end, and then you take that same character and you just introduce them into a different module. The GM can set reasons why they're engaging with this other module, and this runs the gamut, right? So you like I don't run a traditional tabletop. My system, my setting, my story, my world, my skills, my dice rolls, all of it's completely original. Um, so it's there's no modules for me really. I could adapt some, I suppose.
As opposed to
Um,
like modules are typically provided by some people,
Usually you get
somebody
them. Yeah, you can buy
published.
modules. The internet shares like there's huge communities of people who just write little stories, and you
Okay.
run your players through them, and they have like certain little trigger events that they can interact with, or it'll say, oh, make a uh, an int check for everybody who walks past this thing on the wall, right? And if somebody notices it, here's this other little optional thing you can do.
It's level design.
Um, Literally, yes. Uh, my version of it, I write arcs, so I'll have like kind of a this arc ends when this event happens. Uh, the players can interact with that, or they cannot. It'll still happen. Like there'll still be a siege on a town, or there'll still be an assassination attempt that'll just be automatically successful because the players aren't there to interact with it. And the world changes based on that. Now, as far as like an ultimate objective, sometimes if I'm running a really short game, like if it's only going to be like let's say I intend to run it for 90 days. I'm going to run, one game a week for 90 days, and then the end is this. Yes, obviously you want to strive for the good outcome. There could be a bad outcome. Those characters might be used as like a side thing or something. But for the most part, my games last 2 or 3 years. Um,
Interesting.
it's usually about 150 sessions is what I shoot for.
How many
With
hours per session?
six, typically for I'll call it 5 to 8, just depending on the how much time everybody has, because we're all working professionals, etc.
That's 800
And
hours.
it's a lot, yeah, it's a lot. And
800. 800.
usually I've got like just kind of light guidance, I'll call it. This most recent one we're doing, they actually have a temple that they work for, and the temple gives them jobs based on their rank. Well, the higher rank they get, the bigger the jobs are, and that's kind of what they're working through. But it's also figuring out are is the temple that we all work for, are they the good guys? Like I present them with a lot of moral decisions. I present them with a lot of things that they can stop and do to get greater renown. I don't have like levels with experience or anything like that. It's all about renown and ranking up if you want to get into bigger challenges. But um, I do always have, like I said, arcs end at a thing happening. The game typically ends on a TPK, so if all the players die, game's over. So I can write, 1,000 hours worth of story, and they can get 20 hours into it, and I'll die, and I start over.
TPK's
Um,
total player knockout?
total player kill.
Total player
So
kill.
everybody's dead. Um,
Got it.
It doesn't happen often, but it has happened. I will say all of my games thus far have ended that way, with one exception. And this group has a few players have come and gone, but like we've been pretty much the same core group, I would call it, since about 2014 at this point. They've managed to get to a quotey finger like win condition one time, uh, and usually it even comes with like me warning them, like NPCs will show up, be like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And they're like, "Yeah, push the button." And it's like, okay, well, now it's not even my choice anymore. Like,
Hmm.
uh, I MacGuffin some things here and there. I'll every now and again they'll get some plot armor, but for the most part, no, they're playing a game at the end of the day. And they can interact with that how they want to. But no,
But
I guess that's a long answer to a short question. But
is it a designed TPK? Like, is everyone by your design going to die and then they find a way out that you hadn't intended? Or is it always meant to be that there is a way out? They just never quite found it?
That's one thing that whether it's this core group I play with or any other of the side groups that I run games for, the one thing that I'm as a GM I'm personally given a lot of credit for is there's always another way. If you come up against a boss and he seems unkillable, there is a way. And I've designed probably more than one way even, and that's not even counting the chaos element. So right, like I can say if you get this scroll from this other level in this thing, you can use that against him. Or if you have this particular resistance, it'll be a relatively easy fight. But then there's the third option, always the third option of chaos. Like the players just figured out, like, well, wait a minute, we have this scroll that amplifies damage crazy, and that guy over there can cast one spell before he passes out at this like level of power, and it's like we're gonna do it, and I'm like, it's a very small room that you're in. You're gonna unleash this fireball, and you're gonna amplify it 4 times. They're like, well, we all have shields. Let's just roll the dice and see what happens. It's like, okay, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but.
Dang.
But right now, it's actually like ultimate player creativity because I've gotten rid of the magic system, and they have like a base, like they basically have like a source of power that each of them selected, and it's their choice and it's their work to figure out how to manipulate that source of power. So it's almost like I've given them a completely freeform power system, and they've been going crazy with it. So I've been having a
Hmm.
really good time with my most recent stuff, but.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's I always try to design multiple ways for them to solve any problem. Like if it's a trap, they're in the garbage compactor using the Star Wars example. Yes, I will
Hmm.
have the prop things up and try to stop it. I'll have your NPC's been trying to stop it all along. Maybe he'll succeed. And then always I allow for the players to be like, well, I have all these grenades, right? Like, I mean, granted, it's a fantasy setting, but yeah, I'm sure that the example, I'm
What
sure that
this
my,
makes me think of in general is the concept of difficulty, which I feel like is an understated thing, but is very difficult to accomplish. Like, it's like everyone's
hmm
played a game where you're just like the AI at some level is like, okay, they're too easy, and then the next level, you're just like, they won't die, and like
Yeah.
it just feels unsophisticated, and you're like,
yep,
it doesn't register as an intelligent challenge.
yeah,
Um,
oh yeah,
so it's like, how do you build that in? Like so when you're tabletopping it and you're DMing, you can spontaneously respond to what's happening, and you can like semantically say like, well, you're in a room and these are the constraints, and you can adapt your direction based on their circumstance. In the VR world, like for example from Light, I feel like from an outside, I feel like the idea is that you have to create a scenario where all of these things are possible, or not all, but it feels like all things are possible within the scenario.
I think how I would handle that, and you're absolutely right, because say you have a mission where a player is presented with 25 bandits that they have to kill. Okay. Single player might find that very difficult. 4 players, which is our max group, might find that very easy, especially as they're scattered throughout. So now the question becomes, do you scale the bandits difficulty, which is some games have done where, oh, I've got more players in, so I make them harder. And I don't like that because I like a bandit to be a bandit to be a bandit. I don't want to change them magically just
yeah.
because I have
Nobody
more
likes
player
bullet
stance.
sponges.
Yeah, right. Especially not in a physically based VR game. Like
Oh,
you
those
can
Yeah.
games are
only
terrible.
you can only hit a guy so many times before you're like, all right, dude, there's got to be a reason you're not dying.
Yeah.
Okay. Um,
Magic. Yeah, the more people are different kinds of people.
yeah, exactly. So what I'd maybe take a look at that is start the scale from the top end. Plan adventures for your max set of players, and then give the player the ability to hire NPCs that generally follow them, generally do what they need, so they have the ability to solo a mission. Or set up certain places in the mission where the players can get by based off their, their ability to be smart. When we did that walkthrough of that level, right, and we talked about the sneaking aspect, where you were, on this ledge above this fire, and you could like, transition on the ledge, and it was cool. Like it felt like something
Mm-hmm.
out of a movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that legitimately adds to the both the cool factor of the game, but also the player who figures it out, they're like, oh yeah, I did something awesome. So we can
Mm.
build in little things like that that make our levels cool, but on the same token, set up your levels for 4 players, right? Set up your levels to handle that so that the players that do progress past that because they're that good, they have that sense of accomplishment. And if your players can't do it, give them the option of taking some NPC buddies into the fight with them. And that'll help even the odds.
Okay, so here's a question that links that specific idea of the decisions you make while being sneaky, or whichever route you choose through your route, combining it with the super objective of what do you want or what do you not want. How can, let's say for example, that level that you walked me through, how can the decisions around being sneaky to take the ledge and kill the guy and hide his body so his friend doesn't see and escape while they notice, or whatever, kill them all or whatever it is, how can that relate back to the want or not want? What is it that we understand at that point that every decision we make will either contribute to or detract from for our own morality? And it makes me come back to the idea of, are we from light? So how can we relate, like, what these people, who these people are that we're going to kill, are they going to make us feel like we're from light or not from light?
Well, and I think the easy answer to that is when the players complete a certain mission, you do a roll up of how they completed the mission, right? Did I sneak through, kill the minimum amount of people, and leave, right?
Mm.
If that's the case, you write that to your event log, and now going forward, you reference that event log and you say, hey, this is how the players did this. And this is like, in a perfect world, I would have an AI game master that could dynamically change the world and how people reacted according to how the players did it. We don't have that ability. GPT is
And
not that good,
a
right?
sentiment tracker.
Yeah,
I'll start training it right away though.
yeah. you you
I
get on
started
that.
fine tuning a model recently, 3 days ago. I started fine tuning a model, but we'll get to
Yeah,
that later as another thing.
yeah, but
I think it is
but
possible. I think it is possible. I want to say that. I think it is possible through prompt
it
engineering and
is
like
possible
Python.
to draw out certain things from a model, but it is not possible to dynamically change a game or levels based off of that yet. Um, we have the ability to inject, via JSON, which is a JavaScript object notation, to change levels dynamically. And we might be able to get to the point where we're able to have either an AI or just standard scripting, because I think AI is an overused word these days,
Mm.
um, to be able to like parse through what somebody did, create the JSON, and inject that into the level that they're in, right?
OpenAI's APIs rely primarily on JSONs.
Well, that's because JSON is a very efficient way of tagging data to its actual values, right? That's how
Let's talk about
we.
this afterwards. But I feel like using the completions endpoint, there is a way that you could actually get a semantic and contextual based result from characters in the game
Yep.
and get a response back that will actually, through the context of everything available, uh, route a new pathway for them in a JSON to create
Yeah,
a dynamic level. I
absolutely.
think it's possible.
But then we have a problem
Mm.
because we
Naturally.
have to develop for those possibilities. You create a million possibilities, and you either have to condense them down to a few possibilities, or you have to take account for the variety of ways they can go. because you need art assets, you need
But like,
sound. I mean, there's a whole bunch of
can
stuff
you
that goes into that.
can you account for them before and make that part of the which is getting very technical, but like if that you could have your parameters predefined and that becomes a part of the branch response that you get from the
Well, and this is
developer.
actually a great conversation to have with regards to storytelling, because unlike a pen and paper game where it's narrative, right?
Hmm.
You don't have, if, let me take us back. If you can bullshit a story off the cuff, you do not have many hours of development that need to go into that story. Right now, we don't have the same ability with a video game. We've got a lot of procedural stuff that we can do, but procedural things in video games tend to be more expensive. And our platform is Oculus VR, which is, I
Even
mean,
more limited
like,
for rendering.
yeah, you can see the screenshot that we've done, and this is a screenshot taken that is has a wide open area, lots of foliage. We've got dynamic sun. We've got a lot of things that people said were not capable for this platform, right? We're pushing it to the absolute limits. But when you start getting into procedural stuff, you get exponentially more expensive. So you do have a technical burden on what you can do for that type of storytelling.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I wonder. I think it's a conversation for another time to actually get into the technicality of it. But if the problem I think is on the NLP parsing on the game side, which is that's not
Mhm.
available, is you can't really do NLP processing locally, especially not on VR. So it'd have to be some other sort of methodology, and you have to
I would just
map
spin up,
on.
if I were architecting that, I would just spin up a server that would have a pre-trained model, and you would give it
Yeah.
your text string, and it would spit back the answer.
So yeah, the vector embeddings we're talking about. It's another conversation. Another
Yeah, this
conversation.
is we're getting into serious nerd stuff
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's unfortunately
Out of
when
scope.
you when you're talking about game development, you've got so many different layers of stuff, and anybody who says game dev is easy is out of their mind. Um,
Mm.
you know, like when we first got started in development with Odin Softworks, we were doing training and simulation for international humanitarian aid organizations, world military, stuff like that, which is all right. You know, you start up with a contract. You have very stringent requirements. Talking about narrative, your narrative is usually like as shallow as can be, right? Um, Going into the game dev side of it and making that change has been eye-opening because there are so many layers onto what you need for your narrative, what you need technologically, what you need for your user experience. I would say like game dev, super rewarding. I love it. It's tough. And there's a lot of people out there who, they see some game and they're like, "Oh, these developers suck."
Mm.
Give them a break.
I can't
Seriously.
imagine. The
Yeah.
one thing I that really struck me is like I didn't realize that was the thing was how hard multiplayer is. Like the the concept of replication, I was like, what do you mean with replication? Just this whole paradigm around doing one thing on your computer is not the same thing as trying to replicate on somebody else's computer. And I was like, oh, I thought that was solved. I thought that was just like a thing that we could do. And then I realized it was highly burdensome and you had to do it. Like you have to do it. Make that happen. I was like, that's
And
crazy.
that would be, I think we should dedicate an entire episode towards replication. Um, because yeah, you're not wrong. That's a real son of a bitch.
It's so ridiculous.
It is. Oh yeah, it's not in the scope of talking about narratives.
Yeah.
It's not in the scope of anything like that. I do know the next time we get together, definitely talking about the tropes because I think that's going to be fun. Beyond everything, that's going to be fun.
Yeah.
And actually, just as a little teaser, Baker, what are some tropes in D&D in tabletop? Like, what's the one thing if you say that, all your players are going to be like, oh, for crying out loud. I'm putting you on the spot. I'm
Oh
sorry.
my god. Do you want it like alphabetized? Do you want how much time we got? I mean, like,
let's say
Cliff
you
notes,
got
Cliff notes.
7 minutes to go. I want to keep this live stream to under 3 hours.
I think
How long have we gone?
I think my least favorite trope that happens in tabletops all the time, is okay. Oh my god, there's so many. Well, okay, I'll go with the one I encountered most recently on a tabletop podcast that I'm not going to name names, of course. But they had the woman as vehicle for cause of revenge trope, and that's just a straight up storytelling trope. And it's one that's been going for so long, it's completely insane. Where it's like you introduce a female character that has nothing going on, she has no personality, she has no qualities whatsoever, other than woman die, make hero man angry. And I just encountered that one again, and it was like it's just mind blowing that that's still being propagated.
This is why I loved Deadpool 2 because the opening was exactly that. The fucking opening credits, where it was
Oh
a
yeah,
meta commentary. It's like, did they just icebox this woman just for the sake of revenge?
yes,
Or whatever, I forget the term they use, but it's something like that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
ice her.
Yeah, no, that one is so long going. The mysterious traveler trope is one of my favorites, where it's like we encountered a mysterious traveler. Well, we know what's going to happen there.
So
The adventurers walk into a bar trope is just
I
that's
just
where
I just started reading The Sword of Shannara, which
from the Shannara Chronicles.
yeah,
No,
it
the terrible TV
literally
show. I'm saying it out loud. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm reading the books
I'm kidding.
because
I respect the creatives and I love them to death, and they worked hard, and the actors, and I love everybody involved.
maybe
Boy, their
the
hands
ones who
were
did the
tied.
books, but
Anyway,
I'm
continue.
sure
The
we're
reading's
gonna get a whole bunch of hate for this, but it's like the guy ripped off Tolkien. He ripped off Tolkien to the point where like he just like named the elves after the dwarves. Like the names are the fucking same. Like Durin the elf. It's like
Wait.
fuck.
Okay, so that could be
You can't do that.
that could be homage, right? That could be homage. But it's like if I name my main character Pepsi, I'm getting sued, but it could
Yeah,
also
right?
be counted as homage.
But
Okay, no,
like the whole
Pepsi,
book
the hero's
starts out
journey.
right with his arch nemesis Coke.
yeah, that's right.
But like
and
the whole
the third the old god RC. Continue.
that's like the token like mentor in the story. No,
I
like
see.
the book literally starts out with the mysterious traveler.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It
I
literally
read that
like
book.
that's the first thing, mysterious traveler, and he's so mysterious. He's more mysterious. He has magic powers. He's like the strongest dude there. It's like, the fuck, man.
Yeah. Like,
Gifted.
fuck out of my book, Tom Bombadil. You're not welcome.
Yeah, right.
No, in all seriousness, the I will say the setting in that book. I know I just bagged that show so hard, and I don't mean to. Actually, my wife and I watched that show. We had a great time watching it. Even the second season that went even more batshit insane. We really enjoyed watching it too. In like a sci-fi original kind of way. Sharknado.com. But the one thing they did that I loved in that story was that the orcs, I think they were just like dudes in like a bunch of like random old gear. It was just like regular old people just wearing like hockey pads and stuff, but deliberately in the story. In the story, that's actually what they are. And they have like this scene where they go to like a zone where if you go in there, you're gonna get sick, and they know everybody who goes in there gets sick, and they walk past a radiation warning, but like they don't read English anymore. They don't know, any of our current modern languages because that story is actually set way in the future.
Yeah.
So like you have like collapsed skyscrapers like in the background. I'm
I'm
not
actually
saying
intrigued.
Horizon. Yeah, I'm not saying Horizon Zero Dawn did it better, but Horizon Zero Dawn also does the same thing in a beautifully crafted, incredible video game series. Not to say I have any preferences, um, but yeah, no, the Mysterious Traveler, it drives me up the wall.
So I have a question then.
Just
Is
shoot.
it I've okay, so in screenwriting and stuff, like the idea of the cliche and the trope, it's not necessarily to be stigmatized. It's just you just do it well. Like
Yeah,
cliches and exposition, especially expositions are I think a really important point. People always say, "Oh, it's too exposition-y." It's like, well, that's kind of all we are here to do is to expose
you're
what
right.
a character thinks and feels and all that stuff. What you're really worried about is bad exposition.
Yeah,
So
push
in
button for
trope,
exposition.
yeah, and it's like you've been my friend for 5 years. You would never do a thing that's like, oh my god, like
Hmm.
everybody feels it, everybody
Yeah.
knows, but except for the writers, they didn't feel it when they wrote it. But otherwise, my question is, with all these tropes being laid out and the pitfalls of them, is it necessarily a bad thing to avoid, to align to some tropes? And if it is a bad thing, how do you avoid all the tropes? Can you
No, no,
avoid
no.
tropes?
I'm gonna say right off the cuff, it's not a bad thing at all because we find comfort in familiarity, right? Like the hero's odyssey is a hero's odyssey, because yeah, damn, it works. We have all these things because it's how we tell stories,
It's been
and
shaped
yeah,
over
you
time.
can
We figured it out.
sure, yeah, we figured out what grabs people, and I don't think tropes are necessarily a bad thing by any means. I mean, like I use tropes all over the place. It's just my tropes are awful, and it makes everybody sad. Um, on purpose. Uh, it's like
Ah,
psycho. Are they
And
playing my game to be psychologically abused? I don't know, maybe. But
and I think that's a good direction to go in next time we come together.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Um, let's talk about the tropes. Let's talk about where they're done poorly and where they're done well and what the
Yeah,
difference is. Because
yes.
Connor, I
absolutely.
think you're 100% on board. There are times where you see the same BS over and over and over and you love it. You just dig it. You eat that stuff up with a spoon, right?
Yeah.
And then there are sometimes you see it and you're just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm dealing with this again."
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
time in a movie anybody's ever said the words "my old friend," I want to punch myself squarely in the balls.
Interesting. My
Right?
old friend.
Farewell, my old friend. Just lay it in there, man. It's the only way to make the
It's
pain
like,
stop.
have you ever seen or have you seen the latest season of Letterkenny?
No, I have
I've
not.
never heard of
Where
that.
they, it's first off, great Canadian TV show. It's
I
funny
thought it
as
was
hell.
Canadian, but when you said it, I was like, it must be a Canadian show.
Yeah,
It wouldn't
no,
be.
highly recommend it. It's funny as hell. In the latest season, they start going after like weird things in Hollywood because there's a bunch of like Canadian hicks, right? It's very Trailer Park Boys. But there's
Oh
a
yeah, I
there's a
think I've seen
point,
this next one.
yeah, there's a point where they're like they talk about the guys who, have conversations for dramatic pause where they go, where they're about to say something and they do that. And it's a thing in Hollywood, right? Nobody talks like that in real life, but in Hollywood, people bring that out. So
Huh.
it is funny to see that displayed then. And
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, great segue into what we want to roll with what are good tropes, what are bad tropes, what tropes add to a game, and what are we so sick of seeing that I'd probably throw myself off a skyscraper before I put it into FromLight?
I
For
spoiled mine,
example,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
yeah, if I were to do a go kill 10 rats quest, it would have to be tongue in cheek.
Mm.
Absolutely.
We were talking about what were we talking about, the bow and arrow that would destroy the livers? We should definitely get into
Oh
that.
yeah,
Oh, that
yeah.
was hilarious.
That was really good.
What the fuck? Liver shot. Liver shot.
Liver shot. What?
Right.
How do I make this not happen? It's the only weapon that kills them. Who would do this?
You read it, liver bow? Like, what is this?
It's like, no, you read the inscription on the bow, it just says lol. But you have to have a really high intelligence to know that that's what it says, to read the ancient language. You'd be like, oh, let me look at this for a second. Hang on, let me hit this stat up. You hold it up and like it's all like gibberish, but then, like it slowly like forms. Lol. You're like, son of a
Imagine that. It's like teasing you from level 1, like when you're a mastery level, you will know what this is. You get to, 1,000, you read it as
Yeah.
lol.
No,
it's
like
it's
you get
just the
stone-
little little
Yeah.
handprint like that. That's what it forms into.
You just
God,
you get this
son of a
stone
gun.
tablet.
Got
You,
him.
you start the game with a stone tablet in your pack, and you max out your translation skill, and it's just like a dirty limerick. You're like, son of a...
Yeah. Just shit on the gamers.
Sometimes that's like,
There's
we
value
can talk
added.
about that. We can talk about that. Yeah, but sometimes that's like my favorite moment in games. When, like,
Absolutely.
I realize the developer is literally just screwing with me. I'm like, oh, you son of... Whoever you are, hats off to you, my friend. You got me.
All right.
I have notes. I'm gonna flash them just for record's sake if it'll get it.
We
I don't
we
know if it'll get
we
it.
can't see that at all. You should probably just take a picture on your phone.
I'll
You
take
know what's
pictures,
weird?
send
He's
it.
gonna take a picture on his phone. It's just gonna say lol. So that's all of that. Just says lol.
If I'd thought of that, I should have done that.
Lol.
No, I
All
can't
right.
do it.
So, thanks to the people who joined us. We're going to be doing this again in 2 weeks, talking about tropes, getting in depth
Yeah.
with what works, what doesn't work. Talking, God, that's a long topic. We might have
That'd
2
be fun.
episodes on that. Yeah. Tropes are always fun to talk about.
That's a good seed that I think starts the rest of it, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, you know me. Boob armor is my absolute antithesis. I hate
I think-
that.
Oh man, boob armor is awesome. I will die on that hill next week. Just you wait.
We have to figure out how to classify that. We can't
Hang on.
die.
So if my character, right, if I'm a larger man, would it be moob armor? Anyway, we'll talk.
Yeah.
about that.
Anyways.
You're murder hobo boom armor baker.
Yeah.
That's also actually they used to call me that in college. Weirdly, it's a long
Yeah.
story.
Weird
but-
enough.
Yeah,
But
I would explain it to you, but unfortunately, I swore a blood oath to those Sherpas, so I can't really.
That adds up.
so
Dang.
we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Yeah, this has been an absolute hoot, and as between now and then, we'll try to kind of enhance our stream and see what we can do and create some more value added. But till then, thanks for joining us, and this is the Devcast.